It's almost time. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off.
Welcome to the Silver Halide Show, podcast number 2 on Oliver Stone's 1991 film, JFK. My name is John, and I'm the host and producer. Thank you so very much for downloading and listening. This show's website is all one word, lowercase, thesilverhalideshow.blogspot.com, or ThesilverHalidesShow. To begin the show, I interviewed Jamie Duval, the host of Movie Geeks United, which is what I consider the best film show on the internet. And I've been an avid listener for over 2 years now. He was kind enough to speak with me for 4 hours about JFK and Oliver Stone. Following that will be material about the film from a variety of sources, including Roger Ebert, Stan Smith, DVD Beaver, E-Film Critic, Internet Movie Database, Wikipedia, Answers.com, American Cinematographer, Film Comment, and a variety of others. Concluding the show will be the man himself, Oliver Stone, speaking about his own film in audio clips gathered from the net. I will end this intro with a brief word on the Fair Use Act, and then we will begin the show. Fair use is a doctrine in the United States copyright law that allows limited use of copyrighted material without requiring permission from the rights holders, such as for commentary, criticism, news reporting, research, teaching, or scholarship. It provides for the legal, non-licensed citation or incorporation of copyrighted material in another author's work.
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing I'd just be curious about is, the first time you saw it or heard about it, and reactions, and then perhaps how it grew on you over time with more viewings and such.
Yeah. Well, it came out December '91. It did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was in movie theater management back then, and I was definitely into movies. And Born on the 4th of July was actually the Oliver Stone movie that made the deepest kind of impact on me on a visceral, emotional level. And so when I heard about Oliver Stone doing JFK, I thought it was perfect for him. So the film was on my radar for a long time before it came out. And that was a particularly busy year for him because he did The Doors earlier on in the year, which I didn't quite like. I'm kind of 50-50 on Oliver Stone films. He's a director I admire tremendously, but half of his films I'm insane about, and the other half I'm not so crazy about. But I did have great hopes for JFK. I thought it was perfect for him. So,
and in that year building up, because you were aware of it coming out, were you privy to much of the hype and quote unquote controversy?
I was. I knew that a lot of journalists and media figures were attacking the film as it was being made. It was kind of all over the place, and I kind of expected it from Oliver Stone. It didn't surprise me, just because of the incendiary nature of the material.
Right. Okay. And seeing it in the theater the first time, I unfortunately have never seen JFK in a film theater.
Wow.
1991, because it was such a quantum leap, photographically, editing-wise, montage, all this stuff. It really must have been an experience to see it at that time back then.
It was. I was flabbergasted by it. I mean, it even today, and I've watched it, I'm sure over a dozen times since. It's a 3-hour, 15-minute plus movie, depending on what version you watch. That flies by in a snap of the finger. I mean, it is done at kind of a breakneck pace. There's so much information, visual and information and dialogue-driven information that's flying out at you, and it's just, you just have to keep up. So I mean, I was enthralled from the first time I watched it. I knew that it was a monumental achievement, and the audiences responded to it. I mean, it was a movie that provoked discussion after people walked out of the theater, which has become more and more rare. But it's also it's fascinating subject matter. I mean, it's the crime of the century. I mean, in American history, it's one of those Goliath stories that just draws you in and fascinates you. It's an endless kind of rabbit hole. But when you talk about this case and the content of the movie, so I was really into the JFK assassination and that whole phenomenon before the movie came out. So the movie itself just enlarged that for me.
Wonderful. I have no problem saying that I think it's got to be the most, I'm not sure if the word is deep or thick, but it's the thickest film in terms of, as you say, the onslaught of information, whether it's audio or visual or even text. I have yet to see a film, well, perhaps maybe Nixon as well, but films that just, they hit you like a punch because there's so much information to take in.
Yeah, very much so. And it's amazing to me because if you see dialogue-heavy films, and we were talking about this earlier, in terms of The Social Network or The Insider, talking head films, it's interesting how the director puts his stamp on that. And this was Oliver Stone from the first frame. What fascinates me about it is that, I mean, a friend of mine that I was speaking to tonight said it's really the first movie of the 90s because you see a lot of the elements in there with the mixed media, but also it works because it feels new, but because it really deals with classic themes too. This is a David and Goliath kind of story. Kevin Costner against the U.S. government, and it's also Oliver Stone's Frank Capra movie.
Yes.
And Kevin Costner really is the Jimmy Stewart in the piece. So it has a real Americana feel to it, kind of like the opening sequences of Born on the 4th of July do for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree.
And it's about patriotism too, which if anything aggravates me about the reception to the film by the naysayers. They always avoid that. I think Oliver Stone did this because he has a love for America in his heart. He fought for the country, and I really feel like it's one of the most patriotic movies I've ever seen. Take stock in your government and the way your country is being run. They're working for you. Don't be misled. Don't be lied to. Don't let injustice stand. That at heart, that is what I responded to most from the movie. Those ideals.
And I think that would be the best approach. I don't think anyone would have wanted to see a sort of a dramatization of just the official story, like perhaps about the Warren Commission or something. It was so much better served doing it in a fashion like this that even if it ruffles some feathers and such, it's going to encourage contemplation or reflection. And as you were saying, the film itself is fascinating in that I feel if you're not even aware or interested in the JFK assassination, the film works as just a separate entity just a film itself. You don't have to take messages from it or know anything about it. It can just be a very interesting, well, for lack of a better word, thriller, political thriller. But then, of course, if you are into the assassination or if you've seen the film before, as you say, it is this rabbit hole that you go into, and it is the best kind of film because every time you see it, there is either new stuff that you're seeing or hearing, new conclusions that you're making, and oftentimes you enjoy it even more than perhaps the previous. I have it running right now on my Blu-ray, and it's just the scene with Joe Pesci in The Office, and just the cinematography alone, I'm blown away. I'm thinking, my God, this was shot in probably 1990 or 91, and
it was shot in 91, which is amazing. It was done at such a breakneck pace, and actually, you can feel that. You can feel that in the energy of the movie. I think that served the movie.
Right. There are no scenes that really linger or go on too long. They end right when they should. The cut is where it should be. There's no scenes where you're kind of, okay, how long is this going to go till the next part, or that you're fast forwarding through.
Yeah.
Everything, as you say, is done hyperkinetically. And I was impressed that just because I know Oliver Stone had said they were experimenting with the widescreen 2351 on Born on the 4th of July. And the thing that they learned was that you have so much more screen. It costs you more money in terms of extras and sets and this kind of, which was a learning experience for them. And I'm not sure exactly what ratio they applied in The Doors, but I know for JFK, right at the beginning, he told Bob Richardson to go wild and mix everything from, Super 8, 16 millimeter grainy black and white, high quality 35 millimeter color, even there's black and white video. It's an amazing collection of styles and it's not like your typical film where there will be one section in one style and then another section in one style. This film goes back and forth between its techniques through whatever type of material it's discussing at that moment.
Yeah.
Fantastic. It's almost the way a person thinks, in a sense. Like you're watching someone's brain imagine this, and there are different styles throughout.
Well, it's like when people say that their life flashes before their eyes, and this is a major piece of American history flashing before your eyes in different bits and pieces and segments and perspectives. And so, I think all that mixed media really adds to that. But I wanted to go back to something that you alluded to about the rabbit hole aspect of it. The movie can be appreciated as fiction. It probably is largely fiction. We don't know how much of his speculation is true or not. We may never know. He's the first to admit that. This is a counter myth to the Warren Commission, is what he always says.
Yeah.
So it can be appreciated just on the level that you said as a political thriller. In terms of theme, I think that it has a similar theme to Zodiac, which is it is a rabbit hole. It is something that can obsess you, that you can become obsessed with, and something that you can never kind of crawl out of. I see that in the Garrison character. His investigation goes deeper and deeper and gets more and more kind of exaggerated, his theories, and his personal life suffers. And so it's dealing with a lot of those kinds of themes too, and that speaks to me.
And you have to have a very strong anchor in a film like this, as you say, a Jimmy Smith type of character as the lead, because he is going to be walking you through practically every scene and setting the tone, whether it's emotionally or just in terms of what the film is trying to accomplish in those scenes. And for Kevin Costner, coming off of Dances with Wolves, where he had just become a director and was recognized with the Oscars and such, I know he turned the picture down initially and came back, but I'm pretty sure he was nominated for an Oscar for Best Actor. But my opinion, I think it's his best performance.
I think it is too, and I think it's his bravest too. And I think it was at the perfect time in his career when people still saw him as the everyman. You know, Oliver Stone had the choice of they had spoken with Harrison Ford and Mel Gibson as well about taking the part, and Kevin Costner only did it because he had a conversation with his wife, and his wife convinced him, "You got to do this movie. This is going to be one of those time vault movies." And so, yeah, Costner works perfectly for it, and he's not showboaty, he's not flashy. He kind of represents the America at that time when our optimism was being shattered. I mean, as a country, and he wants to make it right. And he believes in truth, justice, and the American way. I mean, as corny as it sounds, that's what he represents in the movie. So yeah, I think he was ideally suited for it. He is wonderful in it, as are all the colorful character actors. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a better assembled cast for any movie.
Yes, I'm sure Robert Altman probably took some tips from it. But Kevin Costner, I mean, I appreciate that a lot in an actor when they're able to get away from their vanity, and as Oliver Stone says in the commentary, like he hides behind those glasses, and it's not, oh hey, I'm Kevin Costner, I'm a leading actor, I'm a pretty boy. He's right into the character, seriously, and as you say, very honestly. And it's that honesty, whether it's he himself or the character, that, as I say again, is the anchor of the picture. And I know Oliver Stone said in the commentary that he considers this like his godfather. And just in terms of, as you say, with the cast, there's no one in the cast that I have any disagreement with performance-wise. In fact, there's many I find very surprising, and yet those surprising performances are often, at least in my opinion in some cases, defining performances for some of those actors. In particular, I think of and you may not agree, but I think of Lolita Davidovich or Brian Doyle Murray.
Yeah.
And very small parts, and on the page, very plain. Like if you read the script, there's not much there. But in the very few frames of time they have in the film, they really make those characters their own. And I mean, also even John Candy.
Yeah, John Candy, I was about to say that.
Coming out of nowhere.
And I guess his kind of flop sweat was real. I guess he was so nervous being on that set.
It was. It was. Yeah.
And he's tremendous in it. I mean, the thing is with Sally Kirkland at the opening, and there's so many great performances in this thing. Michael Rooker, Walter Matthau and Lemon, and Ed Asner is great in it. And
playing a
Oliver
right
Stone
winger.
loves that. Yeah, Oliver Stone loves that. Actually, he loves working with the old Hollywood guys. And he gives them something new to kind of show too. So.
There are very few casting choices in Oliver Stone films that I often disagree with. I find he's usually right on the mark.
You're hard pressed to find a weak performance in any of his films. I mean, I'm sure a few exist, but for the most part, I mean, actors tend to give their best work in an Oliver Stone movie.
And it's funny because for all the slings and arrows that he suffers, you really never hear any of his collaborators or actors describing him as, paranoid or difficult or this and that. It's most often they just have the best things to say. My only regret is that someone didn't write a book about the making of JFK like Jane Hampshire did for Natural Born Killers.
Right.
I don't know if you've read or heard that book, but to me, the one thing as a fan of the film that is missing is a behind-the-scenes account of the making of the film.
I think so too. That is regrettable, but I
probably because they were going at such a pace they didn't have time to follow around with the camera.
Yeah. I think the reason why actors discuss how tough and kind of brutal he is, but in an affectionate way, because they realize it got the best out of him. The only actor that I know of that really bad talked Oliver Stone, other than his female actresses in Wall Street, is Joe Pesci for JFK.
Really? I haven't heard that.
Joe Pesci said to the press after the movie that Oliver Stone's a great filmmaker, but I'm going to curse here. He's a piece of shit as a person.
Wow. Okay.
I guess Pesci did not respond well to him, but
that's interesting because in the commentary he just talks about Joe Pesci as he was fantastic and I loved working with him and he's so great in that makeup and but I find this throughout all of my film studies that perhaps, and I agree with Coppola that the director is the last dictatorial position left, really, and I think you have to be, but with very few exceptions, actors always talk about directors being these harsh, difficult people, but yet they will mention that they got fantastic performances out of them, and they always appreciate that at the end.
Yeah.
I've never heard someone say, "Oh, I was worked to the bone and I regret it."
Right. And just look at Tom Cruise in Born on the Fourth. I mean, also he uses Tom Cruise in Born on the Fourth much like the way he uses Kevin Costner. I mean, in JFK, Tom Cruise is the all-American boy, and then he completely rips him open. And exposed to Tom Cruise that it was a lot more mature and deep than we had seen up to that point, and really that we've seen since. For me, so he uses his actors in a very special way, and his genius as a director of actors is like all great directors. He knows what buttons to push to get them there, and sometimes it's a torturous process for the actor. Some actors need to be stroked, and others need to be pummeled to get to where they need to be.
Absolutely. In terms of JFK, and I mean, just the beginning of the 10-minute intro, all black and white, mostly archival and news footage. And to my opinion, I haven't seen any other film that opens that way. And I guess it goes without saying that this film, that's the best way to open it. But there is such a immediacy and effectiveness of just the opening prologue. Because there are many films that begin with an introduction explaining perhaps the time or the situation and the characters. Mm-hmm. But this, I don't know if it's necessarily just because they had the archival footage that it's real, or perhaps the way it's constructed. But it really gets you into the film very quickly at the beginning in an excited way. And very well that after the assassination occurs in the prologue, it blends seamlessly into the quote-unquote dramatized beginning of the film. There's no harsh cut, or there's no real change. And also I notice in the early part of the film, the look of the film I find is very clean, sort of a yellowish or perhaps pastel tinge to it. In the second half of the film, the colors get a lot more vivid and plush. And but I was wondering if I could get you to just give some comments as we were talking before, but just on the general style of the film. I'm watching a scene right now of Kevin Costner just talking on the street, and I'm thinking, okay, well, this is shot in 35 millimeter. It's normal type footage, but then right away they'll cut to a shot of Lee Harvey Oswald in 16 millimeter golf ball, black and white, and I mean, I guess it sounds simple to say, but no one else has really done that.
They haven't, and Oliver, and I think this movie started to spoil Oliver Stone because he took this style to its extreme in Natural Born Killers, and then he adopted some of it too in Nixon to much lesser effect, I thought. But JFK works very well. The opening, you need a setup. And you need to see what's happening through the prism of history. So you need the actual footage to illustrate that. And the music, especially at the beginning. I mean, this is so much information, and the music, it's thriller music. The dun 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 dun. It's this enormous unfolding mystery in front of your eyes. This is the setup for it. So. And you're right, the photography is pristine. I mean, it's, for a lot of it, it portrays perfect kind of Americana in a way. I mean, it's got this sheen to it. My favorite scene, the scene that astounds me, the sequence montage, is Costner and his associates at the restaurant when they're unraveling who is Oswald? Where does he come from? There's just something about that scene and the cutting of that scene that's so exhilarating to me. It's probably, a 20-minute sequence? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's astounding. That's the showpiece of the movie for me that I always get really excited about watching again and again, because that's also the first indication for me that this case goes a lot deeper. There's a lot more there's a lot more to this guy. When so many questions linger about who was Lee Harvey Oswald, then the whole case. Actually, I'm like losing my train of thought because there's so much to this movie. It's so complicated. But that's actually my favorite sequence in the movie.
Yeah, I agree with you, and like I say, just watching it now, I'm thinking something I really hadn't perhaps put into words before, but as you were talking about, or speaking about in our discussion on The Insider, that this film as well, and it goes right to, you're saying, the conversation in the restaurant, you're right over their shoulder, and oftentimes in their midst, you are part of the investigation. You are learning things as they learn them. And they're also, not only will they sometimes say, the information or this and that, then they explain it as if you're right there. And that kind of involvement, as you say, even if the scene was fantastically shot and the dialogue and such, but to as well involve the spectator that way, it is, again, just another fantastic touch of engagement, I feel, for the audience.
Yeah, very much so. And Bob Richardson was the DP. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, he's just a photographer of enormous talent. And you have his kind of traditional harsh overhead lighting in the film. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of stories about his overhead lighting? Apparently, he shot Heaven and Earth, too. I think, maybe it was The Doors, but someone's hair caught on fire. I mean, it was so intense, his lighting. But that's the look that he's given to his work with Oliver Stone. It's a signature kind of look that he has.
Well, to me, it's a controlled wildness. It's as though at any moment he can shoot it in a fever pitch, or he can shoot it just still on a tripod. And either will work for him. It's just he decides which flourish he's going to use, and 100% of the time he's right. I know that they won the Oscar for cinematography and editing, which I think is incredibly deserved, but also kind of surprising given the nature of the Oscars. But I think they had to recognize both the photography, but especially the editing. And as you were saying, your friend had mentioned it was the first film of the 90s. I have to completely agree, even if we're just talking about the editing style, because you can't tell me that music videos and MTV type things weren't influenced by this. And Also, to me, it's the kind of film I like where you have 4 editors working as a team, working on each other's stuff, but then working on other stuff, and then the director is walking between the rooms supervising. It's a fantastic collaborative effort. I remember speaking to, his name, the editor of Alien and Blade Runner. His name is... But anyway, yeah, and he was saying that when they had Blade Runner, I mean, they had so much special effects and live action footage and stuff that it's incredibly taxing on an editor dealing with multiple kinds of footage to keep that sort of pace and direction and vision. Whereas if you have a team, like I say, you're all coming at it from different angles, you're working on each other's bits and pieces. To me, there's some kind of cohesion happens there where it's a unified vision, but it's a collaborative effort.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you get the sense that he did kind of give them free rein. It feels like that. He said, feel free to experiment. And it seems like it would be a very freeing process for the editor. I mean, they're really, you watch that movie, there are essentially no rules that they're following. Yeah.
I mean, I'm right now. I'm just looking at some black and white, like golf ball 16 millimeter footage of these CIA camps, and it's all just roving handheld, like I say, 16 millimeter black and white. But I'm starting to think that perhaps whether you would call these inserts or second unit, I don't think they are second unit, probably took just as much time as the staging of the dramatic scenes. I mean, it's one thing to just tell the actors, okay, do your bits and the camera's going to follow you. But just the practice to get it in such a fever pitch kind of mode, and to have all the elements pulled off and work at the same time. A tremendous amount of work and preparation must go into that. And again, talking about 70 days, I know Oliver Stone is famous for shooting his films in an incredible short time. I know, like, W was 5 weeks, and even Any Given Sunday was, I think, 68 days. So it really goes to show you that, these films that, because you'll talk about sort of mainstream, perhaps like romantic comedies or whatnot that have 120-day shooting schedules. And you're asking yourself, what the hell are they doing? I mean,
yeah, what for? And like I said before, it really does give the movie an energy. I think that the shooting process is essential in whatever it comes across in the finished film. The process that they maintain to make it comes across in the energy of the final film, especially in a movie like JFK. I also like with his cutting, there's this scene in Any Given Sunday, a lot of Any Given Sunday is built this way, where it cuts to like an insert shot of, say, in Pacino's final speech, when he's talking about regret, and it cuts to a shot of him outside of the reality of that scene, kind of contemplative. There's something almost subliminal that happens to you when you watch that, and it deepens the experience. And I find that a director like Spike Lee uses that a lot too in a movie like He Got Game, which I'm an enormous fan of. He has kind of insert shots, sometimes actors posing and things like that, but subliminally they do something to you. They make you feel what the character is only speaking about at that time. They make it deeper.
You're right, and it's something that I've sort of just come to in our discussion this evening, but it's absolutely true that many of Oliver Stone's films, and as well you're speaking like of He Got Game, and I somehow feel perhaps you and I are the only two people that like that film because nobody ever talks about it. But those moments where he will cut, as you say, outside of reality. But again, to me, that's just sort of the process of the mind and how the mind will, and again, that's encouraging you to be a very active participant rather than a spectator. And the inserts, to me, it's a whole. We could have just a whole show just on Oliver Stone's inserts in his films, or montages that. Yeah. He really invented this technique of a sort of a dissection. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think you know where I'm coming from. And it's evident, yes, in all the hyperkinetic ones, like you say, Any Given Sunday or U-Turn. Sure. Some fantastic just side cuts to, angles or perceptions you wouldn't normally ponder, but are there. Yeah. But I did want to get back to, in JFK, I mean, we had spoken about it's a fantastic and huge cast, and, there are varying degrees of how much they're involved. But looking at, like Kevin Bacon, and I know Oliver Stone was saying in the commentary that this was, again, this was one of Kevin Bacon's first adult roles. And he really kind of came out there because it hadn't really been portrayed in a film before, a fascist gay man in the 60s. Mm-hmm. No, seriously, and I think that was very off-putting to some people. They hadn't seen that sort of reality portrayed. But that performance, just for what he has to do is fantastic. But I guess going down that line, I'm leading towards Tommy Lee Jones because... Mm-hmm. I'll just go on a slight digression here. I know Oliver Stone jokes about it, but filming Kevin Bacon and David Ferry, Kevin Bacon and Joe Pesci and Tommy Lee Jones in Marie Antoinette S&M scene. Right. They were just on the floor laughing at her. I can't surreal. But I'll tell you, you were saying your favorite scene, the discussion in the restaurant about who is Oswald. I don't really know if I have a favorite scene, but I know one that's really coming to mind as I speak right now is the one where you have Kevin Bacon, Joe Pesci, Tommy Lee Jones, and Gary Oldman. It's in Joe Pesci's apartment, and Pesci is going off about killing Castro. Castro and killing the president. And I know Oliver Stone was saying that, and I guess the commentary was made in 2000 or 2001, but he was saying you never see scenes in films like this where you have four major actors like this, not only because of salaries, but just because of schedules now. And in watching that scene, I reflected on that and I thought of it. Here you have four leading man Oscar caliber actors, and none of them is stepping on the other's toes. They're all working in concert. But yet each has his part to do, and they all do it fantastically. And Tommy Lee Jones, he's done, maybe 100 films now and tons of different variety of things. But for me, this is his most out there role. I mean, certainly if I were casting the film, Tommy Lee Jones is not the first person that would come to mind, even if I saw a picture of the real Clay Shaw.
Yeah, he really cast against type when he cast Tommy Lee Jones. But what Tommy Lee Jones does bring to that role that it needs is a gravitas and someone that you can imagine being fearful of going up against. But you're right. You don't necessarily look at Tommy Lee Jones and think sophisticated and effeminate.
No, and a bon vivant, as they say.
Yeah.
But just to me, he was the kind of film villain, and we were speaking earlier about archetypes and the American type of film, and here's a villain where even the first time I saw it, this was a villain that I had. Not misgivings. I was afraid of or bothered by this person. In the film. I was scared of it. There wasn't even at the end when they're in the trial, there was no sign in the character or the actor of, perhaps fear of losing or not. Mm-hmm. For me, going through the film, it was all, oh my God, he's going to piss off Tommy Lee Jones. Right. He was so, I don't know, there was a darkness and a strength there that's unspoken. His lines in the film are very, very literate and sort of very businesslike. but there's an amazing amount of subtext going on in his eyes. I think of that conversation they have in Jim Garrison's office where it's a rainy day and they speak into the evening and you get into this fantastic blue lighting. And as you say before, here you have Jimmy Stewart, against Dracula,
Yeah,
it's an amazing confrontation.
Yeah, and Tommy Lee Jones being totally kind of impeccable mannered. The Tommy Lee Jones character has impeccable manners. He feels like that he's really being kind of unfairly crucified and demonized by Garrison, and he takes offense to it. And he is a very imposing figure. I mean, that's what Tommy Lee Jones, you would expect him to bring to it. But there are elements outside of that he brings to it that make it a very surprising performance.
Let's touch on Gary Oldman for a moment.
Yeah.
Again, a very off-the-wall choice. Even looking at it now, casting Oswald, I would probably go more for Frank Whaley, actually. But but Gary Oldman,
didn't he play like a?
That's right.
Like he played Oswald in the movie.
He played the double.
Yeah, we have him next week as a guest, so I might ask him about
You're
that.
kidding! Oh,
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Please ask him about JFK and the Doors.
Yeah.
Because, just for Frank Whaley, I mean, those concert scenes they did for the Doors must have been, on top of everything else, just for an actor, an amazing experience to be part of recreating a concert with, 30,000 people there.
Right.
And he hung out with John Densmore, the drummer, for several months to get the drumming technique and the info down. And despite its flaws as a film, and I'm quite a Doors fan, so I know that for me the Doors film is a lot like the way I guess your mainstream person might look at JFK. I look at it as a film where it's like 75% fiction and 25% truth. But that's fantastic about Frank Whaley. That's a great coup, and of course that's your show. You always get the great guests, and that reminds me of when you had Michael Rooker on, and I know it was a while ago.
He was nice.
He was. It seemed to me the whole time he's like, my God, I can't believe these guys are asking me about me. But that was his, because I hadn't seen, Henry. I can't remember what year that was made, but for me, that was the first film where I saw Michael Rooker. And there are some actors that you see that, I don't want to say they get typecast, but let's say they're the type of person that will always play villains, or most of the time. And I know in JFK, as soon as I saw the movie, I started always hating Michael Rooker. Every time I saw him, and I knew he'd be the villain. Oh God, I hate that guy. He does it so well, and in that movie, he has a very, sort of a crux point type of part. In that, the first half he's going along with everything and facilitating and being part, and then he has to be, the turncoat who turns on them, and. As I say, to me, that was the first role where he really stuck out. I hadn't seen Mississippi Burning yet, but any thoughts on Gary Oldman and Michael Rooker?
Well, Michael Rooker, he has this volcanic intensity as an actor, and I think that Oliver Stone in JFK, he uses it for someone that it's a character that is very kind of moral and noble in a way. I mean,
I think he's meant for many of the audience to actually identify with the skeptic.
This is crazy. I mean, how could this possibly be the truth? He's that voice for that section of the audience. I think he uses them in a very special way, in a very empathetic way. And Gary Oldman, particularly early on in his career, and this was one of those performances in that stage of his career. I remember being a lover of acting myself and hanging around fellow performers, and we all idolized Gary Oldman because he was one of the true chameleons. We didn't know who Gary Oldman was. I mean, we knew Gary Oldman, the actor, but I couldn't tell you who Gary Oldman was.
No.
Whereas Kevin Costner, you kind of knew, you kind of associated him with the parts he played, and it was a certain type of part, and, you know, he was the everyman. Who the hell was Gary Oldman? He was so different from movie to movie. You couldn't peg this guy, which was beautiful. JFK, you know, it could have been an impersonation, I guess.
Yes.
But there's so little footage of Oswald that we have, so it wasn't an impersonation because he kind of deepened the character. And there's a moment in that movie, in the closing summation, where Kevin Costner says, who grieves for Oswald?
Yes.
And then it shows his tombstone, and it's such a brave moment. And it's a moving moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Lee Harvey Oswald has become this indelible part of history. And we don't really. What do we know of him? Who cared for Oswald? Who cried for Oswald? Who senses the tragedy in Oswald's story? You know, history can be reductive in a way because it doesn't. It's made up of facts and events. It doesn't give you the emotional life of the people involved necessarily. So we depend upon a drama like JFK to do that. I thought the film was very successful in giving Oswald that.
Yeah.
And you said you need an actor like Oldman to get that across.
Well, for me, it's interesting in that Oldman, he inhabits the character, but to me, it's a very interesting performance in that it's not very subtle, yet it doesn't stand out terribly, but at the same time, he's throughout the film. You're conscious of him throughout the film, and I know Oliver Stone was saying in the commentary that he felt the worst thing that happened from the assassination was America's reaction to it, in that they wanted a simplification into a sort of a John Wayne type story where you have good guys and bad guys. And just as you say, in general, Oswald is just portrayed as this bad guy who wanted to kill the president. And you get an entirely different view of that through the film, and a very difficult role to play, because even though the film is trying to, if not portray him as completely innocent, then certainly mostly innocent, they succeed quite well at that. You do feel empathy for him at the end. And getting into another thing I was going to discuss with you, the deleted scenes on the DVD, there is a 3-minute monologue that Gary Oldman gives Oswald in the court, again in black and white, all improvised.
Mm-hmm. And that Oldman wanted to do. I think it was something that Oswald said. Oswald, see what I'm doing? I'm mistaking him for the real person. That Gary Oldman urged Oliver Stone, can I just do this? I need to do this. He himself felt such an empathy for Oswald, and Oliver Stone, being the perceptive kind of director that he is, he allowed and encouraged Oldman to make that investment.
Personally, I mean, whenever I watch the film, I watch the director's cut, because the John Larroquette scene and the attempted assassination of Garrison, or some sort of attempted thing of Garrison. But the deleted scenes, I've constructed a version with all the deleted scenes put back in the right places and that, and so it comes out to over 4 hours. To me, there are none of those deleted scenes that are wasted. Fully included, as a 4-hour film, it doesn't suffer being any longer or losing any of its pace. And obviously, the only reason they had to shed, half an hour of scenes was for length and such. But this leads me into an interesting point that I did want to bring up with you, which is, Oliver Stone has spoken in many times, interviews I've read, and the commentary track, of how not only did he want, but he campaigned to have an intermission after the Donald Sutherland scene.
Yeah.
And not only do I agree with Oliver Stone in his comment, because yes, you you are punched out with a Mike Tyson punch by Donald Sutherland, all this information that is almost separate from what you've learned the entire film up till then. And then, boom, right away it goes into the court case. And yes, in hindsight, it certainly should have had a intermission, and I'm certainly one that, if there's one wish I could have, is that movies would, get some sense, and the longer ones have an intermission. I don't see anything wrong with it. In fact, that's one of the things I like about watching old epics like Lawrence of Arabia or Dr. Zhivago, that they have those 10 or 15 minute intermissions. That's a great time to just reflect, get some energy back.
Yeah. I can see both points of view, and I think I lean more towards yours. Because you are given so much information, particularly in that Donald Sutherland scene, that you need time to decompress a little bit, because you're about to get another heaping of it in the closing summation of the courtroom.
Yes.
So the closing summation might play less effectively. Might play as too much, just too much overkill. Without a break. Without a break, yeah. But by the same token, you're in a groove with the film. You don't want that spell to be broken.
That's true.
So I understand both, but I do think that I agree more with your argument.
I certainly think that's the good part about DVD now.
Yeah.
You can pick it up and put it down and such, and especially with films like JFK that are either long or very dense with information, especially if it's a second or third viewing in that. To be able to go back and look at the specific parts or whatnot is a fantastic advantage. And that also leads me into another thing I was going to bring up with you, which is that one of the deleted scenes is that they shot, and you probably know this from the book of the screenplay, the meeting with Mr. X, Donald Sutherland, was actually two separate scenes. And he met him once before the trial and then once after the trial. And so in the deleted scenes, you can see the second half when they meet after the trial, which is, I looked at both because all they did for the actual film was just not use any footage from the second conversation, just the audio. So you'll notice that the latter half of their conversation on the park bench is more dominated by found footage or dramatized stuff. It's a lot of voiceover. I've looked at both. I like both. I guess, like I say, if you're going for the shorter version without an intermission, it works great. But in its longer form, I have no problem with it, because after the trial, and I guess another complaint I have is many people don't like the ending, in that they feel, well, why would you make a film about a guy who loses a case? And I can understand that. There is kind of although, that is how things worked, and you have to deal with that. But for me, after the trial, him being able to go to Washington and sort of pull everything together, to understand it as a summation, worked very well. And also the end credits were different in that there was different information given before the actual screen credits. But
I do recall that deleted scene at the end where he returns to the park with Donald Sutherland, and then I think I'm right, and it ends with kids playing as the last shot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how it ends as in the theatrical version, because, and it's really summed up by one of Costner's final lines when he looks into the camera and he says, "It's up to you." It's almost like Jim Garrison lost this, but now we're passing the baton to you. And I think that's what spoke to a lot of people of my age that were moved by the film. It made us go back and do our own reading, and made us go back and do our own research and become invested in our country in a way that we probably weren't before.
You were what age when you first saw it?
When I was 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
So that's a kind of that's a transformative experience. when you watch a movie like JFK at the age of 18, when you're just kind of entering adulthood in a way.
I can imagine. Yeah. I myself was only 13 at the time, so I just appreciated the film the first time as just like a political thriller. I wasn't even very aware that it was based on anything real. It was in the subsequent viewings after that I got more into it and was able to appreciate it. It was interesting that, when we were talking about casting and actors and such, I sort of avoided Donald Sutherland because I wanted to talk about his scene and performance, but also in relation to another point, which is that I can't think of, and most Oliver Stone films have at least one or two good speeches in them, but this film has two of the longest monologues I can think of any film. I forget what Oliver Stone was quoting it at, like 15 pages or something, and so we're talking about Kevin Costner in the courtroom and then Donald Sutherland on the park bench. And each of them did them in one take, repeatedly over and over again. There weren't breaks. There weren't, well, we'll just shoot this part and then we'll pick it up over here. No, they shot the whole thing through many times. Which, again, even though the cutting style, they're going to cut it up considerably. You can feel, actually, there's another shot I was thinking of, is when they're going through Joe Pesci's apartment after he's been suicided.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's one long Steadicam shot just following Kevin Costner. It does almost a 360. However, the shot is broken up editing-wise in the film, so you can't tell it's one shot. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's doubly amazing because here you have a fantastically artful shot that could work on its own, but yet it's also supplemented by the editing style that even takes it further.
And something like that might actually be a consideration of the amount of time they had, too, to give the coverage, since this was done in such a limited amount of time. But in terms of the final, the Sutherland monologue, that's very considerate of the actor too, because when you have that much dialogue, you need a continuity. So to start at the beginning and play it through, that's a tremendous luxury for the actor, especially with a piece like that, because there's so much information. I would think it would make you cross-eyed if you tried to. Okay, take it from the middle and be at that point, and did you read who he originally tried to woo to play that part?
No.
Marlon Brando. He met with Marlon Brando to play Sutherland's role.
Wow.
And actually, that's the completely wrong part for Marlon Brando.
Oh, yeah.
Someone who had to tape his dialogue. There's not a body big enough to hold that dialogue for Brando to read off of.
Well, they'd have to shoot it in that Superman set. That way they could have everything laid out in front of them.
Exactly. They got to have jumbotrons in the sky. And so,
wow. Just as a consideration, though, that is amazing. I hadn't heard that before, and that is something.
Yeah.
Never thought. But even Donald Sutherland himself is quite a strange choice for that. And yet, I can't think of any Donald Sutherland performance that is bad.
Right.
It's just, would you call this one of his defining performances? Given the fact he's only in the film for like 10 minutes, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Because he makes an indelible mark. Most people who even don't like the movie will talk about the Mr. X character, which also leads to another point that, a lot of people see the film, and we were talking about seeing it just as a straight political thriller. Many people see the film and don't know that he is a real person.
Yeah. Fletcher Prouty, right?
That's right. Well, it was funny. Just last week, I got two vintage C-SPAN clips. One was a month after, they were both about a month after the film came out. One was he was testifying before Congress, Oliver Stone, and the second was an hour-long discussion at the press club. And I was amazed because I've already had 300 views on YouTube for a brand new channel. That's pretty something. But even in there, he's talking about the fact that the question comes, is the Donald Sutherland character a real person or is it a composite? And he has a very interesting response, which is that I don't mind composite characters, especially in Oliver Stone type of films, because you have to condense information. But he says, oh yes, it is a real person. His name is Fletcher Prouty, and he's right here. But a few of his lines are also taken from this other guy. So on top of it being a real person, it's a composite of two real persons.
Yeah.
Just fantastic use of whether it's, the information or what's there or the actual people. In my opinion, there's nothing wasted in this film. There were no ideas that didn't work, or there were no sequences that are out of place. It all feels like a puzzle perfectly put together.
I think so too. And when I tried to do a JFK show, I thought I reached out to. I guess I didn't. Is Fletcher Prouty? He's passed now?
He's passed.
Okay. Yeah. It was Jim Mars. I can't remember who was Jim Mars. I have emails back and forth from him. Okay. I got his. I started corresponding with him a little bit. It never came to me.
Can you remember anything he said?
No, I didn't interview him. There were emails back and forth on trying to schedule a time for him to do it, and he said, "Sure, call me at home. Let's do this."
Oh wow, that's great.
It just never came to me.
I've listened to many interviews with him. He's a fantastic character to get on the interview.
Yeah, Donald Sutherland is a. How would you characterize Donald Sutherland? He's got this odd quality to him. And he also seems to me to be a very cerebral actor.
Oh, yes.
So I remember reading, I think it might have been a set visit that Premiere Magazine did back in the day on JFK, and they were there for that scene. And Donald Sutherland was kind of banging his head against the wall. He was running over his lines before the shot. And, if it's not one of his best performances, it is one of his greatest accomplishments. It's not something constructed to be a fully fleshed out character, but it's not built that way. But given what he has to do, he makes the music sing. I mean, and he brings some. I think of him when he's counting on his fingers. I can't remember the exact dialogue.
Who was Kennedy? Yeah, who killed Kennedy? Who had the power to cover it up? Who benefited? Yeah.
Yeah, and then at that third point, he changes the three fingers.
Yeah.
And it's something odd. I don't know the significance of that, but I'm sure in his mind there was a significance to it.
My goodness, I've noticed that too.
Yeah, there's little touches and flourishes that he puts in to make it unique. I think it's an astounding accomplishment, that monologue, and it's pure information that he's giving out. He's not stopping for the dramatic kind of contemplation or anything. I mean, there's an urgency. There's an urgency to so many of these performances that drive the film, and he emblemizes that.
And I think as the viewer, he gives the viewer the first sense in the film that Garrison is winning. And as the viewer or spectator, that's the first time you feel that, because it's the second or third line that Sutherland says is, you're closer than you think.
Yeah, you got them scared.
Yes.
They're scared of you. Even if he loses, he wins, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because he starts the shitstorm, which is what you need. I mean, he starts the movement.
Yes, and his role is very similar to, with some differences, but Hal Holbrook in All the President's Men.
Sure.
That sort of that deep throat that is going to, as you say, move it forward.
Mm-hmm.
Or supply the information that is missing. The courtroom scene at the end of the film is very interesting because it's not the normal way a courtroom film or courtroom segments are done in most films. And in fact, I mean, the whole film could have just been the court case.
Yeah.
But to see how they do it again in this rapid, intense fashion, because people who are used to watching perhaps like Law and Order or what's that Paul Newman film?
Verdict.
The Verdict. Yeah, are used to that very staid and conventional way of your statements, your witnesses, the closing, the jury, all that. This is done in a much more invigorating way. And a fantastic summation, as you say, with Kevin Costner speaking to the camera right at the end. And those tears are real.
It's the greatest courtroom summation in the history of movies. I mean, it really is. Nothing kind of compares to it.
Well, I guess we can just leave it at that. That's a perfect summation of that. No, I agree. I'm perfectly serious because it's dominant. It indelibly stays with you. And we touched a little bit on the John Williams score. I just wanted to say that in re-listening to it a few weeks ago in its entirety, on top of everything, it's a fantastic score, and I know Oliver Stone thinks it's the best one he's had. There are I find two distinct types of music in the score. One is, as you say, the conspiratorial music. In fact, there's one track, I think it's track 6, called "The Conspirators," which is what you were humming before. And so there are many. Seriously.
Yeah, sorry, I attempted to do that.
No, because it was right there. It was right on for me. And I thought, yes, it's. Even the first time I remember seeing it, the music had a very strong effect. And then the second type of music is the very, how would you describe it? A sort of for lack of a better word, I would say the beauty of Camelot. Is kind of what I would call it.
The crusader for right. He's. John Williams was greatly affected by the JFK assassination. So when he was approached, as I understand it, he'd written the theme before they even started shooting, and he was there the day that they shot the assassination, and he was very moved by it. This was a big passion project for John Williams, and some of John Williams' best film score work it does come from Oliver Stone films. Nixon is a great score. Born on the 4th of July is gorgeous and sweeping. I love John Williams' work for Oliver Stone.
What would trailers be like without the theme for Born on the 4th of July?
yeah, it's hard to imagine. That music and the music from Hoffa, they're used in every trailer known to man.
Exactly. And I was just going to mention about, your thoughts on it perhaps now. I mean, it's almost 20 years, as hard as that is to believe. And just any thoughts you have, either on its longevity or perhaps how it's grown on you or what you see in it now.
I wish it were discussed more, because I do think it's one of the few films that really made an impact from the past 20 years. In that, just the videos that you posted. I mean, they opened up these documents as a result of the phenomenon of this film. And for me personally, like I articulated before, it really kind of opened my eyes and gave me a different sense of investment in America, much less this case, and then elections, and I think I became a conscientious voter after I saw that. And no movie that quote unquote is patriotic, sells patriotism, it did that for me like JFK did. I miss that Oliver Stone. I miss that brave voice, the one that would stand up to all of his attackers. And I miss more than anything, and this is what I love about JFK more than anything, and what I respond to in all art more than anything is passion. That movie is so passionate. Passion is my favorite word, and my favorite films. Passion bleeds from the frame, and JFK is one of, in my opinion, the greatest films ever made, because it's filled with passion. An artist that is just brimming over with it, and you can sense it in every frame of JFK.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you. I completely agree. I neglect. I'll get back to this in a second. But the thing I was thinking about a minute ago and I couldn't was, I wanted to mention about the just the recreation of the assassination itself. Mm-hmm. That Stone contends, and many other people do, that no one has gone into such detail to recreate it. Even the Warren Commission didn't. And it was shot multiple times, multiple angles, multiple cameras and stocks, and is inserted and repeated many times throughout the film. And again, it's another one of those cases, I can't think of a historical reconstruction that is either more perfectly detailed and yet doesn't look like a staging.
Right.
I don't know if that has resonance for you or not, but I just think of trying to, you're there, you got 100 people, you got all these cars and actors and things, and just trying to organize it all. It just seems like an amazing headache.
at the actual location. I mean, and I can't imagine how emotional it must have been for the actors in the middle of it, and for spectators watching it. And you feel that. There's some movies that, like Apocalypse Now, like the experience of making that movie, which is well documented now. Now when you watch the movie, you can't separate the two. You feel it. It's inbred in the actual film, and there's a profound kind of sense of loss and of the world-changing events in JFK. I mean, the sense that this is the moment where we officially would never be the same again. It's like the 9/11 for our generation, which 30 years from now maybe they'll make a 9/11. An all-encompassing 9/11 film, and I could see JFK being the perfect template to make that film.
I agree with you. Unfortunately, to my great sadness, it won't be Oliver Stone making it. He has very mainstream opinions about that, which kind of saddened me.
But that's how it should be done. That's how you do it, I think.
I agree with you. It is a template of not only the modern, but how you should do a political thriller, whether it is completely drama or whether it's partially. Because I know it was just last week I was discussing with you the De Palma show about Blowout. Mm-hmm. Another forgotten almost conspiracy thriller, and there are many flourishes in that film as well, both cinematography and editing-wise, that you're watching it, and it's made 10 years before JFK,
right?
And yet you realize that the political thriller or the conspiracy, paranoia thriller, whatever label, is very conducive to experimentation photographically and editing-wise, construction-wise. And I don't know if that's because just the subject matter and the material is cerebral and intellectual, or whether that style just works well to keep you on the edge of your seat and involved. But certainly that dawned on me last week when we were discussing both this and your show on Blowout.
Well, and also it's the difference between a filmmaker and an artist. Mm-hmm. Blowout, aside from being one of the great conspiratorial thrillers, it's also about love of cinema. And what cinema can do. Oliver Stone is very similar. I mean, it's almost you feel drunk on film from watching their works. It is intoxicating to see what they're able to do with the medium, and that's the difference between a really solid kind of storyteller, filmmaker, and an artist, someone that brings out a different kind, multiple layers of truth in their work.
And you're very right when you say about Apocalypse Now, how the actual experience of making the film influenced the film itself, whether stylistically or narrative-wise. And I've observed that not only from reading books and interviews with Stone, but just seeing his films, that in the course of the research and the making of the film, what they come across or situations they encounter all inform the film or become involved. I know he was talking about the quote-unquote controversy of the film was basically because somebody stole a first draft and was reviewing the film based on that while it was being shot.
Yeah.
And he's talking about how they're on their sixth draft now, which is more than 50% different. And I can't think of any other, he raises this point himself, I can't think of any other film not only so strongly attacked, but also attacked based on a first draft or a rough draft.
They were out to get him.
Yeah.
And, if I don't think Oliver Stone could make that movie now, and maybe maybe he's tired, maybe he's kind of resigned he's kind of resignated in a way, but also that's a movie of someone made by someone that is younger and has a lot more vigor, and he's pissed off. Mm-hmm. And you feel that in the movie, but he's also.
I'd also say
there's also hope in the movie. There's an optimism in the movie that comes through, and that, like I said before, that's the kind of Oliver Stone that I miss. But all across the board, we talk about this a lot on Movie Geeks United. You think of the great actors of the '70s and how their work kind of doesn't compare because it's missing that fire from like the Pacinos and the De Niros, and occasionally they pop up and they give a great performance, not just a serviceable one. But there's something about maybe aging that JFK feels like it was made by a younger man. He probably even younger than Oliver Stone was at that time.
Right.
And that's definitely who the movie is built to speak to as well. The young generation. It's even stated in a quote at the closing of the movie. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's I should let that sink in for a minute. No, because it's very true. And actually, this conversation has been interesting because I didn't make any notes because, obviously I was confident enough that I could talk about the film, but
yeah,
I've been happy that. Well, thank you. But I've also just been happy that when I say something. It leads you into something, and then you lead into something I was just going to go into. So it's been a fantastic collaboration.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Buck. It's not easy to make a movie that offends just about everybody, but I'm proud of that. Not only George Bush, Richard Nixon, and Jerry Ford, but Andy Rooney, Militant Gaze, and TV Guide. This last year, I've seen some of the worst days of my life. I wouldn't ever want to repeat them. I feel like the opposite of Sally Field. First, I'd like to thank David Bellin and the Warren Commission. I'd like to thank, secondly, the conspiracy buffs. I'd like to thank the Washington Post, who started it all. I'd like to thank the film critics of periodicals like The New Yorker and The Rolling Stone, for your generous support and defense of pre-censorship by the Washington Post, Time Magazine, and several dozen other organizations. I'd like to thank the New York Times. Bless you. Mr. Lewis, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Canby, and the anonymous editors of the editorial board who were very loving in their support of their anti-Oscar editorial in making known their anti-Oscar choice last month, and there are many editorials attacking the movie. I'd like to thank Mr. Alexander Coburn of the left and Mr. George Will of the right, two friends in hell. I'd like to thank Mr. Weinraub, the Los Angeles voyeur for the New York Times, for his lovely support of pure censorship in his article detailing why Warner Brothers should not have made the movie and seeking out the one or two people in Hollywood who would support that point of view. As Jonathan Swift, to paraphrase Jonathan Swift, you can always tell when someone is speaking the truth because all the dunces are in a confederacy against him. I think, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I just looked at this thing this morning. It says, from 1980, he wrote, "A world split apart in East and West. Such as it is, the press has become the greatest power within the Western countries, more powerful than the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. One would like to ask, by what law has it been elected, and to whom is it responsible?" I think the true test of independence is to weave your own weave of the world, no matter how violent the storm gets, no matter how many millions of words they write against you. Let them know that the power of film lives. Film has the power uncrushed of the pagan eye. And that stretches all the way back, I don't know, long umbilical cord all the way to Egyptian times, actually. Film is the underworld. They cannot hide or destroy with their official stories, their official histories, their official lies. No matter how many New York Times headlines they write distorting our true history, they will not last the test of time. Because the lie is built like an ice house in the summer sun. They may win in the short run. They may discredit films, social realism films. But they will never, never win in the hearts and minds and souls of people. Specifically, whose American soul, I hope, will stay intact into the next century. And specifically, I hope we remain true to what Tom Paine called independent and the independent spirit. Because it is truly the independent spirit that will burst the chains of falsehood. As one cynic told me the other day, and I think it's a well-known statement, I don't know what you're doing wrong, but keep it up. Thank you.
You were speaking about perhaps Oliver Stone is tired, and I guess towards the end of our conversation here, I wanted to get into that a little bit. I know it doesn't have as much to do with JFK, but just Oliver Stone as a filmmaker, and I agree with you. It feels like JFK was made, everybody involved was at their peak, or in their prime, shall we say. And because you look at Oliver Stone from Salvador to Natural Born Killers, it was one film every year. And then from Nixon and U-Turn and Any Given Sunday, it was every 2 years. Then he took a 5-year break. Well, not really a break, because he made a documentary about Castro, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. I don't know if you've heard everything about that, but 5 years, and then he makes Alexander, and then 2 years later, he's back to World Trade, and then 2 years W, 2 years Wall Street. So I agree with you that there was a point, I know, in the late 90s where I, as a fan of his, especially after Any Given Sunday came out, and I I appreciated it, but it certainly, wouldn't make any top 10 lists of mine. Where I had that feeling of he's either losing momentum, or he might not necessarily be able to make the kind of films he wants to right now. Because I've read about many screenplays he's written over the years that were either close to being made or this and that. There was a film with Al Pacino about Noriega.
And they read this. They did a read through of the script twice, and it just didn't have a dramatic spine. And I guess they both knew that they shouldn't go through with it. Is what he said about it. Obviously, I'm Al Pacino's biggest fan, so I was salivating at the prospect of that project.
Well, I'm never one to say that all unfilmed screenplays should be filmed. I will say that I have ordered the Kubrick Napoleon book from Amazon, and am looking forward to that quite a bit.
That's quite a package right there.
Oh, my heavens, it is. I think it's about 3,000 pages. Can't wait. Probably take me 6 months to get through it, but no, I know.
Yeah, it would take me 6 months to pay for it. I mean, that company. I just saw a book that. Yeah, I just saw a book that's $700. It's a $700 book. It's not on The Godfather. It's on another one. But I was looking at that and salivating over that. I mean, that's a great collector's item right there.
As someone who has some of them, I will say that, I mean, obviously you're paying a little bit for the company name and the fact that it's foreign, but your dollar value is seen in every page. I have 3 Taschen books on Kubrick alone right now. And I mean, I would pay anything for, even if I didn't have an interest in Kubrick, because the books are so well put together. But
Taxi Driver was the $700 book I was.
Oh, really? Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Kind of a photographic history of another one of the great films.
See, I'm salivating now. I want that book. I'm going to go look at that very shortly.
Look that up. That looks terrific.
Okay, but just getting back to what I was saying about Stone's career in the late 90s, because I know he talked about making, he's actually made 3 documentaries about Castro, and only 2 of them have been released, but the first one was Comandante, and they had a deal with HBO, and HBO was running commercials and promos. I actually remember that, but I was just listening to him talk about this the other night. And 2 weeks before it was to air, they just completely pulled it, bowing to email pressure. But he was saying that they can't even release it in the States because they don't own the American rights. The only way you can get it in North America is by looking at it on YouTube in segments, which is extremely sad to me. I've actually seen the whole thing myself, but I think that was quite a blow for him. Personally, no, I'm not saying that was the one big trigger or anything, but if you sort of look at the time period from 99 to 2004, he did very little other than that one documentary. I think that was quite a surprise. And I was listening, he did an interview with Robert Greenwald of Brave New Films, and he was expressing a lot of admiration for what Greenwald has been able to do with his documentary series. And I don't know if you've heard this, but Oliver Stone is working on a 10-hour documentary. Yes, and it's already sold.
Is it like the history of the secret history of the United States or something?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's narrating it right now.
It's a shame that and I hope he stirs something up with that. I mean, I hope I see the old Oliver Stone in that. It's understandable. I mean, he fought a lot of battles. An Oliver Stone interview was normally an Oliver Stone attack. And when you constantly have to be on the defense.
Yep.
And plus, there comes a time when you pass the baton to a younger generation. I think that Michael Moore is feeling that too. When he made his last movie, he said, "Look, I'm just going to go to narrative filmmaking." And I always kind of regretted. I thought when Oliver Stone got into documentaries, that maybe the Showtime series will be the thing that I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen South of the Border?
I haven't, but my understanding is that his documentary work is very what's the word for it?
Spare.
It is not like his earlier narrative filmmaking.
No.
incites a great vigor and passion and protest, and so I always thought Oliver Stone as a documentarian would be like a Michael Moore type voice. And surprisingly, he's not. I mean, but this is an older man. This is an artist that's kind of matured, and
true.
So I understand it.
I don't sense resignation in the interviews I've been listening to recently. As you say, perhaps there is a settlement in his age and what he wants to do, and perhaps what he feels he's accomplished. But I don't sense any kind of defeat or resignation. I always hear a sort of a tired sigh about, oh God, all that crap I have to deal with, but
yeah,
it's never anything that has sort of defeated him in any kind of past tense way. And no, I wasn't terribly impressed with South of the Border on a film style perspective. The content was fantastic, but no, as I was telling my sister, it almost felt amateurish and very spare and just very, very simple. And so, yes, I'm very intrigued as to what he'll do with this documentary series. And
yeah, me too. And I hope it does bring back a spark of the old Oliver Stone. I know he's still one of the towering figures in American cinema to me, without a doubt. But there's something askew when, you know, a lot of people see World Trade Center, and a lot of people love World Trade Center. Me coming from a point of view of someone that loves Oliver Stone at his best, I was trying to find the Oliver Stone in it. And I've always said World Trade Center could have been a Ron Howard movie. I mean, you know, where's Oliver Stone? Where is he?
I hear you. Are you there?
Yeah,
hello?
I'm here, buddy.
Okay.
I'm here, man.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It was funny. I was having a conversation. My sister lives on a big private school campus with my brother-in-law, who's a teacher there, and it's very exclusive. And anyway, I was talking to this one young man who wants to get into film study, and we were talking about this and that, and I don't know, like I say, you hate to criticize other people's likes or dislikes, but it was just more the surprise that I asked him. I said, well, who's your director? You know, who do you follow? Who's your guy? And he said, Ron Howard. And like I say, I'm not criticizing Ron Howard, but to me that's not any kind of director that would fit into the conversation. So I was very taken by that, and not that I take that as an example of the new generation or anything. It was an odd tick, and so when you mentioned World Trade Center by Ron Howard, I said, yeah, that's about right. You know,
well, it feels like a Ron Howard movie, but look, Ron Howard does his thing. He is more than competent. He's a very solid filmmaker, and obviously actors love him. You know, he's good with ensembles. He has his strengths, but they're completely polar opposite from what I consider Oliver Stone's strengths to be. So when Oliver Stone makes a movie that could have just as well been made by Ron Howard, it's not a criticism of Ron Howard necessarily. It's just, why is Oliver Stone doing that?
Yes,
you know,
it feels like a waste of talent or time. I agree with you. So just a couple last points to touch on here. If you do want a good laugh, though, on YouTube right now, there is the episode of Jeopardy that Oliver Stone appeared on and won in 1997.
I heard about that episode. Yeah.
It's quite a hoot, actually.
What do I just type in Oliver Stone Jeopardy?
Well,
on YouTube, you think?
Oh, yeah, just Oliver Stone Jeopardy. It'll come right up.
Okay.
But you just see that he just doesn't, and I'm not saying he's an oddball or anything, but he just doesn't fit in with the, it reminds me of Jim Garrison in the film on the John Larroquette show. Oliver Stone on Jeopardy, it's identical. He's just out of place, and he wins. But anyhow, it's worth a laugh, especially if you like the guy. Have you read his book or any of his other screenplays?
A Child's Night Dream. I haven't read his book, but I mean, I have read his screenplays. I have all his published screenplays here, and a few that I picked up from various screenplay stores. Like,
I
I have Scarface and the...
Oh, really? I just got a copy of Break. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before.
No, what is that?
He wrote that in Vietnam. It's sort of it's very much like his Apocalypse Now.
Huh.
It's a Vietnam. He actually sent it to Jim Morrison because he wanted Jim Morrison to play the part.
Yeah.
And it's very psychedelic. I highly recommend anyone who likes Oliver Stone or Vietnam movies to have a look. Well worth it. But
I love him. I think he's a great writer. I mean, I loved Year of the Dragon, and I'm one of those guys that loves Year of the Dragon.
Oh, another forgotten film. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, big time.
Well, and I think he had it the right philosophy he talks about, which was that he said to himself, I want to be a filmmaker, but before I'm even going to be able to be allowed to direct films, I've got to write some and get a name.
Sure.
And he has... Yeah, I mean, he still does it to a degree with his stuff now, although I'm sure he farms out a lot of the research and stuff. But his discussions about Scarface or, even Conan, the kind of research he put into it. And I don't know if you've read his original script for Conan, but, I mean, it is Lord of the Rings, 20 years before it was made. Apocalyptic, nightmarish thing, and I mean, you understand with the effects and the time and that why they changed it and such. But as I say, he's one of the few guys where, or perhaps like Woody Allen, that and Stanley Kubrick, that as well as being a fantastic director, he could just as well just be a fantastic writer, equally talented in both.
Yeah.
And very distinctive. Again, another one of those filmmakers where you're watching the film, it's an Oliver Stone film, with the exception of World Trade Center.
I've been back and forth with Oliver Stone's people for years. I've been trying to get him on the show, and it always comes close, and it never happens. But I have such a love for Oliver Stone and the bravery that he's shown throughout his career. I mean, he's an artist that makes really bold choices. JFK, that just could as well have not have worked. The experiment of the cutting style and the different film stocks, but he committed to it, and he ran it throughout the duration of the film. It was a major risk. Even Costner breaking the fourth wall in the closing courtroom summation, a bold move. I like that aspect of artists' work when they're bold and they really go out on a limb. And I love Oliver Stone that he's done that as often as he has in his career. So, and I went to see Oliver Stone speak one time. He came to a local university and to promote his book. Yeah,
in Florida?
Actually. Yeah, he was here to promote his book, and he did signings afterwards. But and even then, somebody. And I took a friend that's not crazy about Oliver Stone, but he recognizes his talent. Okay. I was obsessed with Oliver Stone at the time, but even then, it's like a Q&A from the audience after he did his initial kind of speech.
Right.
And somebody gets up from the audience and says, Natural Born Killers is basically one of the worst movies ever made. Oh. The guy didn't have a question. Oh. But Oliver Stone makes confrontational cinema. That's what makes him such a unique voice, and his film so visceral. I wouldn't have it any other way. But
no, I just was listening to a press conference yesterday for South of the Border. I forget where it was. But one of the first questions was a reporter stood up and said, "How would you feel if in 30 years someone made a semi-factual account of your life?" And I'm thinking to myself, what other filmmaker gets these kind of questions?
Yeah.
I mean, when can it when can it be just about the film itself? As you say, he has had to fight so much and blaze so many trails, and like you say that JFK is not discussed as much as it should be. I think also there is such a debt of gratitude that people owe to this man for his accomplishments, and even though he's won 2 Oscars, those were before he became quote unquote controversial, in some respects, anyhow.
Yeah. Well, he's won more than that, didn't he? Didn't he win Best Director for JFK?
No,
he didn't win that.
No, he did not.
Deserved that. He did for Born on the 4th, though, didn't he?
Yeah, and Platoon. The year JFK was up, it was the Silence of the Lambs sweep.
You're right.
So, unfortunately, yeah, I remember watching that at the time. But I was going to mention this, just two little tidbits. One is that I remember him appearing on Larry King in the mid-'90s after Nixon. And one of the questions towards the end, and God knows why I remember this, Larry King asked him, "What haven't you done yet that you'd like to do?" And he said two things that I found very interesting. He said, "Well, my mom is always after me to make a romantic drama." And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. And then he said, but the other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to work with Robert De Niro, and I'd like to make a Western.
Huh.
And I'm one of those people that, like, I don't like every Oliver Stone film. I probably like 3/4. But I really, aside from Alexander, which I thought was pretty good, I just appreciated the fact that here's Oliver Stone really taking a step out there and doing something different. I mean, Oliver Stone doing a costume historical drama. That was out there, and I'll go see that. And so, like with his new stuff, I mean, Wall Street 2, never in my life did I think I would see, Oliver Stone make a sequel. And, one can debate whether, the timing was right or the opportunity and this and that. I sure feel that I haven't seen the film yet, but if it's what people say, I think they'll definitely give Michael Douglas an Oscar for it. But
I can't wait to see it. I'm seeing it tomorrow, actually. So.
Oh, good. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I hope to see, actually, I'm going to do a double. I'm going to do Wall Street and then Social Network back to back.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what you think of Social Network, especially. So get back to me when you watch it. But there's something about Oliver Stone, too, with his age, I guess.
Sorry, I got to interrupt for 1 second, but one thing that, is hardly ever discussed, I wish it would be. He did not start directing films. I mean, I don't know if you want to include The Hand and Seizure, but Salvador he made when he was 44. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is a guy who doesn't start directing films until he's 44 years old.
Yeah.
And within 7 years, he's got 2 Oscars and 4 or 5 of the most talked about films of that decade.
Yeah,
that's
it's amazing.
Amazing output in that amount of time at that age. And so, like, I'm someone who's in my 30s and sort of, my film career has gone to the side, but I'm not necessarily defeated in my mind because it may sound kind of lame, but I always say to myself, well, Oliver Stone didn't make Platoon until he was 44.
And plus it takes some time for an artist to find his voice, and I think that it happened like it should have happened. He found it when he needed to find it. But
yes,
talking about him kind of bucking against expectations with the genres and the types of movies he does. I mean, Nixon is like that, as is W, because people fully expected these films to crucify their lead subjects, and they were very empathetic to them.
I don't know how you feel about it. I like Nixon. I like the approach, and I'm with you in that I feel, even if it had been done 20 years later, he missed doing that in W.
Yeah. But I do feel like he's very fair-minded about both figures.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Just to interrupt again, I was listening to, he was speaking in an interview last night, and when he came back from Vietnam and he was at NYU going to film, and he was talking about all the students he was with, pardon my language, but he was saying they were all pussies. And he was like, I'm the guy who's like, okay, let's get some guns, let's go do Nixon.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
I love that.
Here's a human being with enough empathy and understanding, and as well, the seasoning of age, that by the time it gets to be the early 90s, he can make a sympathetic biography about this fellow.
Yeah. And I think his Western is U-Turn. I think that's the closest he's getting to Western.
That's when I brought up Robert De Niro on Western. Yeah, that's what I thought U-Turn was. And just to go off on a sidebar, I mean, it wasn't a great film in that, but just a coup to get Ennio Morricone to do the score.
Oh, what a great score too! I love that score. I play that score all the time.
Oh, yeah, he is one of those guys where it seems that everybody wants to work with him. And one of the last things I wanted to mention is that for people who listen to the show, or even people who just like Oliver Stone, I find he's one of the most engaging filmmakers to listen to, because he's both very genuine and human, but at the same time he can get very deep into the discussion, whether it's politics or film. And I easily in the top 3 for DVD commentaries. I've listened to every one of his ones many times. Yeah,
by far. Platoon, you could hear the pain in his commentary.
Well, he often confuses. He won't say Charlie Sheen. He'll say I or me.
Yes. There's a moment in the JFK commentary towards that third act, after what he thought should have been an intermission, where he gets so fired up and passionate. You can hear him banging on the table almost, and he's like, "Damn it, this is our country." I love that about him. He's great.
And the other thing I love is just, you were saying, you've had your struggles getting him on the show, and at the time I was going to interject and say, that's interesting because, every week I typed in Oliver Stone plus MP3 into Google and YouTube just to find new stuff. And I'm always amazed at some of the shows he does go on, in that they're, very superficial or very eccentric
talking
things.
Points. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, he was on a DVD Verdict interview for 10 minutes, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing on there? Go on a show where people like you and want to talk about your stuff.
I regret not having him on the show yet, because he doesn't know. It's not that I'm great or anything, but he doesn't know. He doesn't know what he's missing, because I am so passionate about so many Oliver Stone movies. As a director, he has changed my life as much as any other director that has influenced me. I want to sit down. I want to talk to him. Give me a half an hour, and I guarantee he's gonna love it. But I can't convince these people that.
I'm right there with you. I just want to give him a big hug, because he has helped me so much, and I know a lot of, if I'm wanting to watch something and can't think of something, right away I'll just drift into, okay, I could do an Oliver Stone film easily. And but the beauty is on the internet that there are so many talks or lectures he's given that are on Google and YouTube that are like an hour long, and they get into quite detailed discussions of his work. And again, just for anyone who's into his stuff, it's a fantastic resource of, learning from what he has to say in that, but B, he's just a fascinating guy to listen to. The kind of guy you'd like to meet on an airplane.
Yeah.
You can talk about anything.
Wonderful conversationalist, but just the honor of being able to tell him, look, you've really made an impact in my life, and I hear you. I'm one of those guys one of those audience members that you reached. And I think that means a lot to filmmakers, because like you do a show, I do a show, we don't know if we're reaching anyone necessarily, or who are we inspiring or moving in some way or communicating to. So it's always encouraging to hear that, especially when, with Oliver Stone, like you said, so many of the questions directed to him have this kind of condescending tone to them,
Absolutely.
It's like a filmmaker can wonder, what am I doing this for? Like Michael Moore's wondering now.
Yes. Just a side note for a minute, I spent the month of August making my first podcast for this other radio show I do, which is more politics and conspiracy, but it was just about the JFK assassination. And I'm familiar with audio editing and such, but I can easily figure I spent over 60 hours on it. It ended up being over 8 hours long. And it had been a few years since I'd done something creative like that, and these feelings of the anxiety of the audience, either the reaction or just wanting to have some people see or hear it. And it once again dawned on me that, for all artists, the one thing that viewers and spectators take for granted is that, and in film in this case, filmmakers never get to enjoy their film seeing it objectively.
Through the audience's eyes, yeah.
So it has to be about the joy and the learning in the making of it, in the creation. Because once it's created, whatever else comes is going to be from the audience, the market. And I think those kind of things tie up the artist in knots so much more often than not. And it doesn't have to be so. And he seems to be a guy that looks back on his films and doesn't have very many regrets, except for maybe Daryl Hannah.
Yeah.
Well, I know on the commentary track for Wall Street, there's this scene with Charlie Sheen and Daryl Hannah in a restaurant, and he's describing, he's like, she gives her line, he's silent while he gives her line, and then he says, that was 18 takes. I didn't know what to do. I felt like Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah. She is pretty vapid in it. You can tell she doesn't want to be there.
No, and I don't know if you've heard the full story, but it was like Sean Young came in the first day, and she said, I'm Darian. I'm the Daryl Hannah character. Right in front of Daryl Hannah. And, but Oliver Stone's like, at the end of the day, she was right.
Yeah. And Sean Young was her own brand of nightmare back then.
Oh boy, he talks in the commentary track about how she would show up not knowing any of her lines. Meanwhile, Michael Douglas is like Al Pacino. It's all about being on text, and knowing it back to front, and just the clash of styles was quite something. But I'm sure that's similar through all his films because he tends to use many different kinds of actors. He'll use guest stars, he'll use leading men, he'll use bit players, character actors, all in an incredible melange, and they all feel like they get enough time to make their mark in film.
Rodney Dangerfield in Natural Born Killers. He's brave choices all across the line,
Oh, I had forgotten about that for a moment, and yeah, you're absolutely right. There are too many to recount. I guess just in closing, couple of things. Where do you rank on your personal list? Where do you rank JFK? Like if you have a top 50 or top 25 or whatever, where is it on your list?
JFK is in my top 3 or 5 movies ever.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, and Born on the 4th of July is there too.
Has that changed over time at all?
Not really, because they represent seminal moments in my life.
Right.
The first time I saw Born on the 4th of July, it felt like a punch in the gut, and it was something I was so emotionally connected to, that character's journey and the passion in which it was brought to life. The same thing with JFK, and a movie like Wild at Heart too, is David Lynch's Wild at Heart does that to me too. And they're all three made around the same time, and they were an important part of my life too. 17, 18 years old. I mean, all this happened around that period, so it has a lot to do with my personal growth too, and where this journey, this deepening love of movies began. So I always associate those 3 movies with that, and so those have always been 3 of my all-time favorites. I mean, there are others, 8.5, and All the President's Men. I mean, there are many movies that have inspired me, but JFK's right there at the top of the list for me.
Wonderful. And do you think, I guess this is kind of an obvious question because it seems to have so far, do you think it will always stand the test of time?
Yeah, because I think that it deals with timeless themes. I mean, beyond the JFK assassination, it deals with being an honorable person and fighting for what is right. I think it will survive as, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington will always survive, and movies of that ilk.
Okay. And I'm in total agreement. I think it'll be like Citizen Kane and then 2001. It'll always be on those lists, and that's the best part that I think that he could have wanted, and that most fans want. As you say, it's a little disappointing that it's not as mentioned or discussed as it could or should be. But I know most magazines I read or websites or whatever, it's often in people's top 10s, and I'm really happy about that it hasn't completely disappeared. Although I just wish they would quit showing it on TV here, because they keep showing it in Pan and Scan, and not only that, it's extremely edited for language. They even dubbed over the word damn.
Wow.
Because my friend was going to watch it, and I'm like, what are you watching? He's like, I have it PVR'd from AMC or whatever. And I'm like, don't do that. Watch the real version. See it for real.
It's like, why do you televise a version of Scarface? It's why castrate the movie? Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, though, I will say that the Scarface TV version is a work of art, in my opinion, because of the amount of work to make it workable on television. I'll give them some credence for that. But no, I'm right with you in that it should be viewed properly. But it's interesting. I would like to have another discussion sometime, because, like you're talking about when Wild at Heart came out and JFK, and these are some of my favorite films. But of course, I wasn't big into film then, and so a lot of the stuff I read, it is speaking about it in hindsight, as especially like 1990. They talk about the year of David Lynch, because of Twin Peaks and Wild at Heart and that. And while I can appreciate the product and the work in that, I wasn't there to experience it. And so, as you say, there's that personal connection that also goes along with some of these films. I know for me, like if you're talking about Lynch, when I was really getting into film studying, it was seeing Lost Highway in a theater.
Yeah.
That just, I looked at it and I'm like, this is how you make films. And when I look at JFK, that's how I feel. I'm like, not only is it a template, but like, this is how you do it. There's no sentimentality. There's no drama for the sake of drama. Like, it reminds me of the discussion the screenwriter of Cape Fear was talking about when Scorsese took it over from Spielberg. And he's like, everything I took out of the screenplay that Scorsese wanted me to take out was everything that Spielberg had put in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just getting rid of the sort of the sentimentality and
it's the artist's voice too. I mean, Spielberg can't make a Scorsese film or vice versa.
No.
I mean, and they're smart enough filmmakers to know what their strengths are. Wild at Heart works for me a lot like JFK, because it's about there are no rules. He creates an environment in which there are no rules. Wild at Heart is everything. I've always said about it. It's a horror movie, it's a musical, it's a romance, and everything's so heightened and you feel it so deeply. And it's seamless in a way in its sloppiness, even though it is kind of sloppy and messy, but it's a seamless tone, because it's established right at the beginning that this is a film where anything goes.
It's a bombardment.
Yeah.
I think perhaps that's the kind of film that we're both talking about, is the kind of films that are incredibly visceral, that are, very sensually active, right in your face. And obviously, those are the best kind of films, the one where you're less passive and more involved. And I guess just to close in perhaps, ironic jest, I would say, always be on the lookout for mentors, because you never know where you're going to find them or where they're going to come from. And we should all remember that one of Oliver Stone's film professors was Martin Scorsese.
And then they both have definite similarities. And I throw Spike Lee in there, and I also throw De Palma in there because when we're talking about directors who as they grow older, they kind of soften. That hasn't happened with De Palma. He's the one guy of that generation that he still got as much fire as he did when he started out. He said, "Controversy, bring it on. I'll give you more of it."
Well, coming from that Easy Rider book by Peter Biskind, his descriptions of De Palma always made De Palma sound to me a lot like Paul Schrader. They were both very much outsiders in that California group back then. And you're right. They'll never lose that. I don't know what jadedness or hardness.
Fire in the belly, it's there.
Absolutely. Okay, well, listen, thank you so very much, Jamie. I really appreciate it. Fantastic conversation. I couldn't have asked for anything more, and I don't think I could have planned it better, and nor would I want to. It was a very topic-to-topic, free-swinging
Well, that's great, and you've been wonderful, because, it's been a very easy conversation to have, because you've been wonderful to spar with on this, and, we talked for over 2 hours.
Okay.
Wasn't he just great? That was Jamie Duval from Movie Geeks United. Again, in my opinion, the best film show on the net, and I highly recommend giving it a listen. And I'll also mention that I was interviewed by Jamie for an upcoming episode on his show on Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. So a little cross-promotion going on here. But again, thanks to Jamie for such a fantastic conversation and so many great insights and comments and reminiscence. It was a very casual and smooth conversation, which was strange because we had never spoken to each other before, ever. And we ended up speaking for over 4 hours. JFK by Roger Ebert, December 20th, 1991. 4 stars. Oliver Stone's JFK builds up an overwhelming head of urgency that all comes rushing out at the end of the film in a tumbling, angry, almost piteous monologue. The whole obsessive weight of Jim Garrison's conviction that there was a conspiracy to assassinate John F. Kennedy. With the words come images, faces, names, snatches of dialogue, flashbacks to the evidence, all marshaled to support his conclusion that the murder of JFK was not the work of one man. Oliver Stone's new movie JFK has been attacked in the weeks before its release by those who believe Stone has backed the wrong horse in the Kennedy assassination sweepstakes, by those who believe the hero of the film, former New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, was a loose cannon who attracted crackpot conspiracy theories the way a dog draws fleas. The important point to make about JFK is that Stone does not subscribe to all of Jim Garrison's theories, and indeed rewrites history to supply his Garrison character with material he could not have possessed at the time of these events. He uses Garrison as the symbolic center of his film because Garrison, in all the United States in all the years since 1963, is the only man who has attempted to bring anyone into court in connection with the fishiest political murder of our time. Stone's film is hypnotically watchable. Leaving aside all of its drama and emotion, it is a masterpiece of film assembly. The writing, the editing, the music, the photography are all used here in a film of enormous complexity to weave a persuasive tapestry out of an overwhelming mountain of evidence and testimony. Film students will examine this film in wonder in the years to come, astonished at how much information it contains, how many characters, how many interlocking flashbacks, what skillful interweaving of documentary and fictional footage. The film hurtles for 188 minutes through a sea of information and conjecture, and never falters and never confuses us. JFK does not unmask the secrets of the Kennedy assassination. Instead, it uses the Garrison character as a seeker for truth who finds that the murder could not have happened according to the official version. Could not. The film stirs up that kind of urgency and anger. The CIA and FBI reports on the Kennedy assassination are sealed until after most of us will be long dead. And for what reason? Why can't we read the information our government gathered for us on the death of our president? If Garrison's investigation was so pitiful, and indeed it was flawed, underfunded, and sabotaged, then where are the better investigations by Stone's attackers? A U.S. Senate Select Committee found in 1979 that Kennedy's assassination was probably a conspiracy. Why, 12 years later, has the case not been reopened? Stone's film follows through documentary footage and reconstruction most of the key elements of those 1963 events. The shooting, the flight of Air Force One to Washington, Jack Ruby's murder of Oswald, and it shows Garrison in New Orleans watching the same TV reports we watched, and then stumbling, hesitantly at first, into a morass of evidence suggesting that various fringe groups in New Orleans, pro and anti-Castro, may have somehow been mixed up with the CIA and various self-appointed soldiers of fortune in a conspiracy to kill JFK. Stone certainly gives Garrison a greater measure of credibility than he has had for years, but the point is not whether Garrison's theories are right or wrong. What the film supports is simply his seeking for a greater truth. As Garrison, Kevin Costner gives a measured yet passionate performance. Like a man who has hold of an idea he cannot let go, he forges ahead, insisting that there is more to the assassination than meets the eye. Stone has surrounded him with an astonishing cast, able to give us the uncanny impression that we are seeing historical figures. There is Joe Pesci, squirming and hyperkinetic as David Ferry, the alleged getaway pilot. Tommy Lee Jones as Clay Shaw, hiding behind an impenetrable wall of bemusement. Gary Oldman as Lee Harvey Oswald. Donald Sutherland as X, actually Fletcher Prouty, the high-placed Pentagon official who thinks he knows why JFK was killed. Sissy Spacek in the somewhat thankless role of Garrison's wife, who fears for her family and marriage, and dozens of others, including Jack Lemmon, Ed Asner, Walter Matthau, and Kevin Bacon, in small key roles, their faces vaguely familiar behind the facades of their characters. Stone and his editors, Joe Huching and Pietro Scalia, have somehow triumphed over the tumult of material here and made it work, made it grip and disturb us. The achievement of the film is not that it answers the mystery of the Kennedy assassination, because it does not, or even that it vindicates Garrison, who is seen here as a man often whistling in the dark. Its achievement is that it tries to marshal the anger which ever since 1963 has been gnawing away on some dark shelf of the national psyche. John F. Kennedy was murdered. Lee Harvey Oswald could not have acted alone. Who acted with him? Who knew? From an internet article entitled JFK the Movie, The Facts. Stone's film became embroiled in controversy even before it was finished filming, when Washington Post national security correspondent George Lardner showed up on the set and wrote a scathing article attacking the film based on the first draft of the screenplay. Upon JFK's theatrical release, many of the major newspapers in the U.S. ran scathing editorials criticizing the liberties Stone took with historic fact and his accusations that President Lyndon B. Johnson was part of the coup d'etat to kill Kennedy. Initially, Stone's film performed slowly at the box office, but it gradually picked up momentum, earning over $205 million. JFK went on to win 2 Academy Awards and was nominated for 8 in total, including Best Picture. The film does not specifically say LBJ was involved in the assassination, but more seems to say it was more of an Army-CIA thing. Zachary Sklar, a journalist and a professor of journalism at the Columbia School of Journalism, met Jim Garrison in 1987 and helped him rewrite a manuscript about the JFK assassination. He essentially changed it from a scholarly book in the third person to a detective story, a why done it, in the first person. Sklar edited the book. It was published in 1988. While attending the Latin American Film Festival in Havana, Stone met with Sheridan Square Press publisher Ellen Ray on an elevator. She had published Jim Garrison's book, On the Trail of the Assassins. Ray had gone to New Orleans and worked with Garrison in 1967. She gave Stone a copy of Garrison's book and told him to read it. He did, and quickly bought the film rights with his own money. The Kennedy assassination always had a profound effect on his life. He said, "The Kennedy murder was one of the signal events of the post-war generation, my generation." Oliver Stone eventually met Garrison and grilled him with a variety of questions for 3 hours. The man stood up to Stone's questioning and then got up and left. His hubris impressed the director. Stone's impressions from their meeting were that Garrison, quote, "made many mistakes. He trusted a lot of weirdos and followed a lot of fake leads, but he went out on a limb, way out, and he kept going even when he knew he was facing long odds," unquote. Stone wasn't interested in making a film about Garrison's life, but rather the story behind the conspiracy to kill Kennedy. To this end, he also bought the film rights to Crossfire, the plot that killed Kennedy by Jim Marrs. One of the filmmaker's primary goals with JFK was to provide an antidote to the Warren Commission report that he believed was, quote, "a great myth, and in order to find a myth, maybe you have to create another one, a counter-myth," quote unquote. Even though Marr's book collected many theories, Stone was hungry for more and hired Jane Rusconi, a recent Yale University graduate, to head up a team of researchers and assemble as much information about the assassination as possible while finishing Born on the 4th of July. Stone had read 24 books on the JFK assassination, while Rusconi read upwards of 100 to 200 books on the subject. By December 1989, Stone began approaching studios to back his film. He met with 3 executives at Warner Brothers while in pre-production on The Doors, who wanted him to make a film about Howard Hughes. However, Warren Beatty owned the rights, and so Stone pitched JFK. Studio president and chief operating officer Terry Semel liked the idea. He had a reputation for making political and controversial films with All the President's Men, The Parallax View, and The Killing Fields. Stone made a handshake deal with Warner Brothers, and the studio would get all the rights to the film and put up $20 million for the budget. The director did this so that the screenplay wouldn't be widely read and bid on, and he also knew that the material was potentially dangerous and wanted only one studio to finance it. Finally, Stone liked Semmel's track record. When Stone set out to write the screenplay, he asked Zachary Sklar, who edited Jim Marrs' book, to co-write it with him and distill the Garrison book, the Marrs book, and Rusconi's research into a script that would resemble what he called a great detective movie. Stone told Sklar his vision of the movie, quote, "I see the models as Z and Rashomon. I see the event in Dealey Plaza taking place in the first reel, and again in the 8th reel, and again later, and each time we're going to see it differently and with more illumination," unquote. Sklar worked with Garrison's side of the story, while Stone added the Oswald story, the events of Dealey Plaza, and the Mr. X character. Sklar spent a year researching and writing a 550 triple-spaced-paged screenplay. Stone rewrote it and condensed it closer to normal screenplay length. To tell as much of the story as they could, Stone and Sklar used composite characters, a technique that would be criticized in the press, most notably the Mr. X character played by Donald Sutherland. He was actually a mix of several witnesses and retired Air Force Colonel Fletcher Prouty, another advisor on the film. However, unlike Mr. X, Prouty had no connection to presidential security at the time of the assassination. Prouty was a former colonel in the Air Force and military liaison between the CIA and the Pentagon. He wrote the 1975 book, The Secret Team, The CIA and Its Allies in Control of the United States and the World. According to Stone, quote, "I feel this was in the spirit of the truth because Garrison also met a deep-throat type named Richard Case Nagel, who claimed to be a CIA agent and made Jim aware of a much larger scenario than the microcosm of New Orleans," unquote. Early drafts of the screenplay suggested a 4.5-hour film with a potential budget of $40 million, double what he had agreed to with Warner Brothers. To justify such a significant jump in budget, Stone realized that he would have to cast recognizable film stars. For the role of Garrison, Stone sent copies of the script to Kevin Costner, Mel Gibson, and Harrison Ford. Initially, Costner turned Stone down. However, the actor's agent, Michael Ovitz, was a big fan of the project and helped the director convince the actor to take the role. While pursuing Costner, Stone presented the studio with a proposed budget over $40 million. The director knew film mogul Arnon Milchan and met with him to help finance the film. Milchan was eager to work on the project and launch his new company, Regency Films, and with a high-profile film like JFK. Milchan made a deal with Warner Brothers to put up the money for the film. Before accepting the role, Costner conducted extensive research on Garrison, including meeting the man, his friends, and enemies, 2 months after finally signing on to play Garrison in January 1991. His film Dances with Wolves won 7 Academy Awards, and so his presence greatly enhanced JFK's bankability in the studio's eyes. Costner was only the beginning of a star-studded cast that Stone envisioned for his film. Quote, Daryl Zanuck's The Longest Day was one of my favorite films as a kid. It was realistic, but it had a lot of stars. The supporting cast provides a map of the American psyche, familiar, comfortable faces that walk you through a winding path in the dark woods. Unquote. Many actors were willing to waive their normal fees because of the nature of the project and to lend their support. The real Jim Garrison, a severe critic of the Warren Commission, played Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren. Supposed assassination witness Beverly Oliver, who claimed to be the Babushka Lady, also appeared in a cameo role. Stone ambitiously wanted to recreate the Kennedy assassination in Dealey Plaza, and had his producers pay the Dallas City Council a substantial amount of money to hire police and reroute traffic and close streets for the 3 weeks. He only had 10 days to shoot all of the footage he needed, and so he used 4 cameras. Sometimes each one had different stocks of film in it. Getting permission to shoot in the Texas School Book Depository was more difficult. They had to pay $50,000 to put someone in the window that Lee Harvey Oswald was supposed to have shot Kennedy from. They were allowed to film in that location only between certain hours, with only 5 people on the floor at one time, the cameraman, an actor, and Stone. Co-producer Clayton Townsend has said that the hardest part was getting the permission to restore the building to the way it looked back in 1963. It took 5 months of negotiation. The first draft of the JFK screenplay was 190 pages long. Stone managed to pare it down to a 156-page shooting script. The production spent $4 million to restore Dealey Plaza back to 1963 conditions. In addition to the challenging subject matter, the filmmaker utilized a variety of film stocks. As the film cinematographer Robert Richardson said, "It depends whether you want to shoot it in 35 or 16 or Super 8. In many cases, the lighting has to be different. For some shots, you could have multiple crews shooting at once, 5 cameras at the same time in different formats," unquote. Stone employed extensive use of flashbacks within flashbacks for a specific effect, and he commented in an interview, quote, "I wanted to do a film on 2 or 3 levels. Sound and picture would take us back, and then we'd go from one flashback to another, and then that flashback would go inside another flashback. I wanted multiple layers because reading the Warren Commission report is like drowning," unquote. Among the many advisors to the film was Gerald Hemming, a former Marine who claimed involvement in various CIA activities, Robert Groden, a photographic expert and longtime JFK assassination researcher and author, and actual assassination witness Gene Hill. The trial scenes were filmed in what is now the Section K courtroom in the Criminal District Court for the parish of New Orleans. The courtroom was completely renovated for filming and has been maintained ever since. It is still used for filming to this day. The actual trial of Clay Shaw took place in what is now the Section E courtroom. The courtrooms are at opposite ends of the building. Filming was going smoothly until Washington Post national security correspondent George Lardner showed up on the set and was eventually escorted off of it. However, the damage had been done, as on May 19, 1991, the Washington Post ran a scathing article by Lardner entitled "On the Set, Dallas in Wonderland," that used the first draft of the JFK screenplay to blast it for the absurdities and palpable untruths in Jim Garrison's book and Stone's rendition of it. The article pointed out that Garrison lost his case against Clay Shaw and claimed he inflated his case by trying to use Shaw's homosexual relationships to prove guilt by association. Stone responded to Lardner's article by hiring a public relations firm that specialized in political issues. Time magazine took Stone to task for doing this, and then ran their own critique of the film in progress on June 10, 1991. They also claimed that Stone was trying to suppress a rival JFK assassination film based on Don DeLillo's 1988 novel Libra. Stone refuted these claims in a letter to the magazine. The filmmaker ended up splitting his time between making his film and responding to attacks from the press. However, the Lardner Post piece stung the most because he had stolen a copy of the script. Stone recalls, quote, "He had the first draft, and I went through probably 6 or 7 drafts," unquote. On its first week of release, JFK tied Beauty and the Beast for 5th place in the U.S. box office, and its critics began to say it was a failure. Vincent Canby of the New York Times wrote, quote, "Mr. Stone's hyperbolic style of filmmaking is familiar. Lots of short, often hysterical scenes tumbling one after another, backed by a soundtrack that is layered strudel-like, with noises, dialogue, music, more noises, more dialogue." Unquote. The Washington Post's Rita Kempley said, quote, "Quoting everything from Shakespeare to Hitler to bolster their arguments, Stone and Sklar present a gripping alternative to the Warren Commission's conclusion, a marvelously paranoid thriller featuring a closet full of spies, moles, pro-commies, and Cuban freedom fighters. The whole thing might have been thought up by Robert Ludlum." Unquote. Warner Brothers executives pointed out that because of the film's long running time, it had fewer screenings per day. On Christmas Day, the Los Angeles Times ran an article entitled "Suppression of the Facts Grants Stone a Broad Brush," attacking the film. New York Newsday followed suit the next day with 2 articles, "The Blurred Vision of JFK" and "The Many Theories of a Jolly Green Giant." A few days later, the Chicago Sun-Times ran an article entitled "Stone's Film Trashes Facts, Dishonors JFK." Stone even received death threats. 2 principal criticisms of the film were the depiction of Jim Garrison as not historically accurate, and Stone's rewriting of history by mixing simulated documentary footage with actual historical footage. Stone answered his critics by releasing a 593-page book, JFK, the Book of the Film, with Sklar, which included the commentaries which included the complete annotated screenplay, 97 commentaries by supporters and detractors, and 340 research notes. The box office for JFK started slow but picked up momentum, and by the first week of January 1992, it had grossed over $50 million worldwide. Stone started to get support for his film. The Miami Herald said, quote, "The focus on the trivialities of personality conveniently prevents us from having to confront the tough questions his film raises," unquote. JFK eventually earned over $205 million during its initial run. Film critic Roger Ebert went on to name Stone's movie as the best film of the year and one of the top 10 films of the decade.
But you know what number 1 was on that list?
Yes, JFK.
JFK.
And they sold this lemon to the American public.
This is actual documentary footage. This is fake documentary footage shot especially for the film. You can easily see how JFK could have been the most confusing and disorganized movie ever made, but it wasn't, and that's because Stone and his editors did a brilliant job of organizing their material. JFK is a challenging film and a confrontational film, It requires a smart, alert audience, but it pays off with one of the most stimulating and thought-provoking film-going experiences in a long time.
We know when there was a time when movies tried to be great. JFK tries to be great.
The film currently has a rating of 82% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 7.9 rating at the Internet Movie Database. The popularity of JFK led to the passage of the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992, also known as the JFK Act, and the formation of the U.S. Assassination Records Review Board. The act was signed into law by President George H.W. Bush in late October 1992. The ARRB worked until 1998. Witnesses were interviewed, some for the first time. The U.S. government purchased the Zapruder film, and previously classified documents relating to the assassination were finally made available to public scrutiny, though thousands of pages are still being withheld as of 2005. By ARRB law, all assassination-related documents that have not been destroyed will be made public by 2017. JFK was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, including Best Actor in a Supporting Role, Tommy Lee Jones, Best Director, Best Original Score, Best Picture, Best Sound, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, and Best Adapted Screenplay. It won 2 awards for Best Cinematography and Best Film Editing.
Let's say I'm dead wrong, and time goes on. Fine. Well, you know what I did. I never put out a history. I put out a dramatic history, and that was labeled as such. I have the right to interpretation as a dramatist. I research. It's my responsibility to find the research. It's my responsibility to digest it and do the best I can with it. But at a certain point, that responsibility will become an interpretation. And I will move on into closed doors meetings. I will invent dialogue. I will create the fabric of a historical drama. I'll come out with my interpretation. And if I'm wrong, fine. It'll become part of the detritus of history. It'll be part of the give and take. You know, the play will either, the movie will either work on its own terms as a drama in 2100, or it will also be perceived as having been historically perceptive. Shakespeare's dramas, thank God for him, lasted better as dramas than they did as history plays, didn't they? But that's not to say that we're wrong today. They in books can go into more depth. But don't tell me for one second that a person who writes a book is more objective than a person who makes a movie. I don't buy that, because so many historians have access to grind and have subjected their own judgment to their own perception and their own subjectivity and partisanship in some cases. It goes on all the time. And every history, in fact, is an omission of facts, because there are too many facts to put in any history. And if you're not a historian, but most historians will tell you that they make very discrete judgments as to what facts to omit in order to make their book into some shape, some length that can be managed. I never set out with JFK to make a character study of Jim Garrison, who I knew and I admired. I used Garrison as one of 4 threads. I mean, the movie is hung on Garrison because, first of all, he was the only public official to do something about the damn thing. And secondly, based on his book, there was a story of a family that was falling apart. But if I had gone into the family life in detail, the relationship between Sissy Spacek and Kevin and the children, the movie would have been 5 hours long, because there was no way that I could do Dealey Plaza, the Oswald background, and then, of course, the Mr. X character based on Fletcher Prouty, played by Donald Sutherland. I couldn't do those other stories. So the movie was crafted in a way that it welded together 4 disparate stories into one. It's a very interesting, almost non-linear kind of film, kind of postmodern in the way it was made. But a lot of people, historians, missed the point of the movie. First of all, if you see it once, sometimes you misperceive. Second time, it's very clear that, it doesn't say anything about 100 corporations or 100 people getting in a room and conspiring. It's much more intelligent and sophisticated than that. But secondly, the movie itself is about the veil of reality that we have around us. The whole first hour of 45 minutes of JFK is based on television perception of Kennedy's death at Dealey Plaza. If you look closely at the movie, it's all television, people reacting. It's very interesting because that's the way we got it back in '63. And the rest of the movie is a tearing down of that veil. And the technique of the movie is done in that deconstructivist style of, like, what is reality? Question it. Think for yourself. You never know. Everything is subject to manipulation. Everything. Your life, the country, murder. And as such, it becomes a very a portrait that puts you in the mirror looking at yourself, which is a disturbing portrait. That's why at the end of the movie, Costner turns right into camera, and he sort of says, "It's up to you." It's an old '30s technique, but it's powerful. So I fished up, these new techniques, and I think people were shocked, and they said, "Well, you invented fake footage and passed it off as real." Not so. What is real? We still have a hard time discerning what is real.
They asked me to inspire you tonight, say a few things that make you write better. And all I can say is that, years ago when I was a young man, many years ago, I formed an idea in my head, a dream, that there was a dream aspect to this life that was larger than me and the everyday phenomena that I was experiencing. In other words, life can be very difficult, very detailed, very overwhelming in all its mass of facts that come in on us every day as writers, as people, as consumers, as whatever we are, parents. So it formed the dream, forge the dream in your being, have it, strengthen it, believe in it, create it. And out of that will come your vision. And the vision will grow with time. It will never be complete. The vision changes. But at least it's there. And if you have this thing in your mind, this institution of writing, this love of something inside, outside yourself that is bigger than you, it will carry you. And eventually you might get some wind in your sails and go farther and farther than you ever think. I have been very lucky in my life. My boat sailed far, far, far away from the original little island I was born on in Manhattan. Thank God. Anyway, thank you very much. I really wish I could inspire you more. Keep at it if you have the dream. Forge the dream, and we'll be there.
I'm not qualified to. I mean, there's so much internet stuff that's so edgy and hot. I've lost interest in trying to be on the edge. I'm into something else right now. But JFK came about because I went to Cuba and I got, under socialism, none of the elevators work. And I got stuck in a hotel in an elevator that took an hour to get to the 8th floor with about 6 people in the elevator. And this woman who was a literary agent from New York and Havana would buttonhole me in the elevator. And she talked to me about Jim Garrison. She was his agent. So by the time I got to the 8th floor, I was exhausted. I took the book. And believe it or not, I read it about 3 weeks later in the Philippines. I was shooting a movie there, and I called her and I said, "This book is incredible. I want to meet the guy." And I met Garrison, who was about 6'5", and I was really tough with him. I was grilling him, asking him tough questions, and he got pissed off and just said, "I don't think we have anything to do with each other. I don't think we have anything in common. I don't really want you to do this movie." So we cut it short. It took a second meeting to repair it, but it was a movie that grew out of that book, but it became something else because we incorporated much more research from other areas. It was not only New Orleans, it was Dallas, of course, and then Washington, D.C. I enjoy movies, across the board. I've always loved movies. It keeps me going, curiosity, childishness. My mom, her, I love Asian movies. I've always, horror films, no, I don't have the stomach for it. I'm scared of them. Chick flicks, yes. Well, frustration can be challenged, too, if you allow it to be. No doubt we all have frustration points and we can't take it anymore, and we vow never to do it again. I don't make that many. I do take a little bit of a rest now. I did 11 in 10 years. I enjoy writing. I enjoy the process that writing blends into directing. I really enjoy that process because you see it all the way through. I love being alone, but I also like the sociability of directing. It's a combination. I love editing, which is a return to the writing stage.
The hardest thing for me is the marketing stage. I'm just not particularly attuned to it. I don't follow fashion. So I'm in the hands of other people. But marketing is very difficult. And going out in public after I have my private side like we all do. You know, sharing the public about why, Mr. Stone, do you want to make this movie? You know, that's like, why don't you see the movie? And then, you know, you have to do that on TV 100 times. It's not an easy thing to market a film. You feel like a fool. A little bit of everything. When I was in film school, I was much more analytical. As I got older, I really enjoy something. I'd rather not know too much about it. I love the joy of it. I still believe in movies. I believe in good stories. I think good stories will last, no matter what niche forms they take. But I think good stories will last. And I always will be. There's a brio to the Hollywood film, which the world should recognize. A brio means a sense of pace, excitement, putting stars together, making it work. Snappy American thought process, not to be too pretentious. You know, that was the American way of film. I hope we don't lose it. But I do believe a story is like Homer. It just goes and goes forever. Sweetheart, you know what it's like. It's the same time. I mean, but structure dominates. Inside the structure, can you create actors who would like to want to do it? Because sometimes you have stiff symbols. The plot, the structure, the meaning determine, to some degree, the action. If it's a true story, those characters did it. Therefore, what kind of character was it? Now, let's say you investigate the character and he's the dullest guy you've ever met. What do you do then? How do you make a dull character interesting? That's a very hard thing to do. Perhaps he's not so dull. Maybe he seems dull. Maybe you have to ask yourself more questions. It's that process. It's a dialectic. It goes on and on and on. You have to ask yourself the question, or have a partner. Many people have a co-writing partner who asks them the tough questions, the devil's advocate, like a law firm. You know, you know what I'm talking about.
Sir, here's a question from a little boy.
A little boy? I don't know if he's a little boy.
Hello, Mr. Stone. My name is Adam Gary, a fan and advocate of yours and fellow writer. I've written... Thank you. I've written some poems here, and one I wrote just today, and you are a very good director, and I like your films. Unlike some people, you don't make a Hollywood mockery of history, but you state the facts, and you give it right at them. Seeing as that you're a director and I'm but a civilian, here's some poems I'd like to give to you, and well, as I say, take it or leave it.
The gentleman in the green sweater.
Yes, Mr. Stone. Under what conditions do you write? Are you a prolific writer? Do you scratch out in notebooks? Do you sit down and look out a window? Do you have an office?
No, I like to write at home. I like to write in a quiet place, and I like to write in the daytime mostly, and make notes all through the day and through time. I keep notes on me all the time, walk around with observations.
When I started in Hollywood, it was like 84. You know, there was no video basically. It was a video thing that started to happen with the DVD in the future as a future item, as a future instrument. They didn't know about DVDs. Anyway, they made a lousy deal on video. The Writers Guild made a very bad deal with the studio, with the executives, and it became ultimately video and Laserdisc. DVDs became a giant nest egg over the next 20 years, much to everyone's shock, surprise, and it outdid movies. All of a sudden, movie theaters were roughly 25% of the whole, and DVDs and videos were 75% of the deal. But the studios had negotiated with the Writers Guild in a very tough fashion, and as far as I know, had declared that the DVD thing was was not in the pot. So when I got successful in this business, the definition of a pot changed. I mean, the pot meant you worked on a film, you got a profit. The profit was based at it was one pot, and everybody put everything back into the pot. Well, all of a sudden the studios are saying, hey, we don't want to put everything, we're not going to put all the video revenue back in the pot, we're only going to put 25% of it back in the pot. We keep the other 75% for enhanced costs and blah, blah, blah. And that's when I got used to more or less this Hollywood accounting business, which is unbelievable the way the game is played. It's like, you know, when we call it a business, they call it entertainment. When we call it entertainment, they call it business, you know. It doesn't end. It's a cat and mouse game. For 20 years, the studios got progressively uglier. I'm sorry, progressively fatter, progressively greedier, at a level that we never could have seen coming possible in 1984, 5, 6. Ever. We never thought that Rupert Murdoch could actually take over the world. You had executives boasting about making $250 million a year, and writers in the street were struggling to make, you know, $20,000, $15,000. You're just a number. You're interchangeable. That attitude has grown across the business world as the corporations got bigger and uglier and greedier in the 1990s, and the media played into it by giving them the covers of all the papers and magazines and talking about how much money a movie made and how much take-home pay some executive had and which executive was more powerful than that executive. And it created this whole executive class. We all fought, writers and directors together and actors, to keep the costs tight. That was always the intention that the way I learned movies was to keep production at a certain number. And you work like a dog to save $1 million, $2 million. And all of a sudden the game changed, because we made the film, and then there was a pot, and everything was put in the pot, and we all shared in any profit above that. Now, over the last 20 years, this thing became much more complex, and all of a sudden the studio said, well, look, the film may cost that for you, but it costs that for us, because we're spending P&A, prints and ads, they called it in those days, which is really advertising. We're spending that much more in advertising. So all of a sudden, you make this kind of movie, but no, it costs that. So that's your pot. Your pot starts there. All of a sudden, you're down here. You made this. But they're saying that's the pot. So you have to absorb all of these huge costs. They will add $5 million to a P&A budget without even asking you, or $10 million or $20 million to a P&A budget. They do what they want. And we're fighting today over this fucking problem, which is at the base of it, I think. Writer, director, actor, we stick together. We stay for the profit picture. We want profit. We want to believe we have a chance on the back end of this movie.
Film is the same kind of spirit. It's like a vitality that you feel. It's in motion. Of course, it involves a lot more money, and it's a very bigger operation. You have to bring other collaborators in. A painter works alone generally. But they're similar, and I find that if I probably had been in another life, I don't have great drawing skills, but I wish I could have been a painter. I think it's a secret sort of desire, which I love the sensuality of painting, the colors, the excitement. It's all in one moment, and it's something sometimes a still photograph just can't do for me the same thing. So I think painting sets, like a piece of music, composers and painters are the most, they work alone, and they're dynamic, and like motion picture people are. You know, there's all kinds of people who practice film, and some people will do it where they do films or collages that are not seen by a lot of people, but they're influential among other filmmakers. They call them experimental filmmakers. You know, mainstream filmmakers, like I am, would try to make it in the commercial marketplace, which is tough. Right now, I'm driven to make a movie that would have impact, would be seen by as many people as possible. Every movie is a risk of some kind. This is something that you have to really commit to. You're going to live with it. People are going to question you to death, and then you got to make it and defend it, so to speak, or stand behind it. Art department's there. Editing's around the corner from that. Senior White Washington. It's been fantastic. It's like the films that I've made, the features I've made, generally have reflected for me the place where I was. In other words, I can think back to a certain year. I know what film I did, and I remember the mood I was in. I remember 1987 by the film I did. I remember 1992, 1995, and so forth. Each feature film I'm committed to entirely. November 22, 1963 changed the course of this country for all time. This is part of the motorcade we did. We restaged it. The witnesses, potential shooter sites are yelling. They're yelling.
We understand there has been a shooting. The presidential car coming up now. We know it's the presidential car. You can see Mrs. Kennedy in pink suit.
No one has ever restaged this assassination the way we are doing now. What we're doing is we're sort of acting as detectives, like Sherlock Holmes is. Chicago Tribune, Washington Post, and Time Magazine. They've had an agenda here to go after this film, to review a stolen first draft. When we are on our 6th draft, I'm not even shooting half of the things in the first draft, and they're reviewing that. It's never been done in the history of movies. There's an agenda here. These are trained Doberman pinchers, these journalists. They're protecting something. They're protecting an old crime. You go to Europe, you go to France and England and Italy, they are still amazed at the naivete of the American people, that they bought this one single lone nut assassin with his magic bullet, that Lee Oswald did it. They laughed at America's naivete, and they know that this was a political murder. They know it. And their press has always reflected that.
Where were you and what did you do when you heard about the assassination?
I was in high school. I was a senior, 17. I was in my room, and just nothing special. Like Costner in the movie, I was doing some work, and a fellow student came in, and he said, standing at the doorway, Kennedy had been killed. We were all shocked, and we grieved for a young, handsome president, but I don't think we ever understood the full implications of that death.
Did you shoot the president? I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir. They have taken me in because of the fact I have lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
How would you describe your movie? Is it a drama, or is it a documentary, or in between?
I think it's a hypothesis. It has many facts in it, but at a certain point we speculate as to what happened in Dealey Plaza. We don't know the answers. We don't have a smoking gun, but we are able to reach certain conclusions. I believe in them, and Garrison it presents them in court. But as I said, it's a hypothesis.
Yeah, it is a hypothesis, but I mean, the Warren Commission examined, at least they say, the whole thing. And what makes you so sure that they were wrong and that you're right?
Well, I mean, that's what we spend the whole movie discussing, is we have to go on a specific case-by-case point. We believe very strongly that the Oswald did it alone scenario is a cover story that was put out from day one, and it was accepted in this country. It was accepted by the Warren Commission. It was in their interests to blame it on one assassin, who was like a John Wayne Western, where he's the bad guy. Lee Oswald shoots the good guy from one window, and in turn he is killed by Jack Ruby, who also dies before he is retried. So it all fits. It's very simple. It's neat. But it's not sophisticated. It's not intelligent, because in a European country or in an Asiatic country, I believe that if a political leader is killed, the first question you ask is why? What are the opposing political forces? What is the leader doing that upsets people? What is the possible motive for killing him? When Gandhi was killed with a bomb in India, that's exactly what the Indian press went to, the opposition parties. The same thing should have been done in this case, but wasn't.
What was your motive for making this movie? Was it out of anger, or?
Well, I think the motive is partly anger, partly a desire to see the truth told, or at least explored, partly a desire to rewrite the history, the false history written about Kennedy as a cold warrior, to examine some of the things he was doing in the 1963 era. My hypothesis is that he was trying to end the Cold War, or was about to in '65. He was negotiating with Khrushchev on several levels. He'd signed the nuclear test ban treaty. He put in the hotline. He was negotiating with Castro, and he was seeking to withdraw from Vietnam.
So do you think that John F. Kennedy was, in a way, the Gorbachev of the 60s? Or
Very much
like
so.
that?
I think that he started as a Cold Warrior, and I think that he became a statesman by the end of his 1,000 days, and that he was rocking the boat 20 years ahead of Gorbachev, and people in those days were much more conservative, and he was dangerous. He was dangerous to the establishment, because I don't think that any... I mean, I think the American public has been brainwashed to believe that Oswald did it alone. All our media has repeated it and repeated it for 28 years. They said that Oswald is the assassin. And most American people, if you poll them, do not believe it. 80% do not believe Oswald did it alone. So the American people, unlike Pierre Salinger, have not been brainwashed. And I'm sad that that Jack Kennedy's friends were people that ultimately betrayed him.
About the movie, you have some black and white shots and a lot of color shots. Is there any authentic material in the movie?
Oh, sure. We have the Zapruder film is in the movie. We blew it up. We stop framed it. We cleaned it up. We steadied it. We have the Nix film is in the movie. I think the Bronson film is in the movie. Autopsy photographs that were taken by a Secret Service man illegally, I suppose, were given to somebody who gave it to us. They're in the movie.
How did you feel about actually shooting on location? Wasn't it a bit scary to do it on the spot where it happened?
Oh, to be in Dealey Plaza the first 2 weeks was very momentous. It was no one has ever recreated that motorcade, or for that matter, stood in the window and tried to take a shot. Real shots. I mean, we were using blanks, but we were firing away. It was amazing.
So you had a heartbeat?
Yeah, it was momentous. I was worried, a little bit worried and scared that something could happen.
Because I don't want to go on and have a discussion.
Yeah.
If anything, what's important to me is why are you telling us this?
That's it.
Because I think it is
the role on the other guy. Just to get on that. Yeah. If you're not comfortable with it, it was always an addenda that came in.
Because the liberal stuff?
About
no, I like it. I agree. It's got to be. It's he starts to lose, and then he stops it
and then he stops
because he knows that I'm going off.
And then you climb back up the second. Yeah. So the second one, the communism thing. I like that when you said the communism thing. It was very clear. That was the point.
Right. All right.
What I'm saying here is that if I allow him to go on without saying that's really clear to me, it's almost in a discussion. Because I can't afford to put him on the stand unless we have an agreement. Which is no one's offered you parole, no one's saying it. So when I say very clear, I got to look in his eyes and figure out that because it's in the conversation if I don't sense that. What I need to know, and he says, boom, and he just charges right back into me. Well, the truth, is that what you want? The truth? Yeah, well, that's what we're seeking. But I'm really concerned about this parole thing.
Do you think we need things don't? I love the gutter. The things don't change anymore. Just throw it away. You leave it in, but just don't make a thing out of it. Don't make that the ending. Just get to that gutter thing. That was great. I'm very happy we came up with that. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was gonna mention to Kevin as I heard that when he said things don't change. That comes right at the end, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Things don't change. What he's saying is my story ain't gonna change.
He says it.
You put me on the stand, my story ain't gonna change.
Right. He says it earlier.
Well, I say I'll tell the same goddamn
story. Good. Okay. There
he says it twice.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's confusing. I think things don't change. I know it just feels confusing to me.
Yeah, then take it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'll tell the same goddamn story. I'm proud of it. Don't matter fuck all to me. I live in the gutter, so don't matter fuck all to me.
Fuck all to me. You got to be in the gutter to smell gutter.
That's right.
I'm in the gutter, motherfucker.
And then shake their hands. Good. Let's shoot one. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
I like the walk-in. The timing was excellent on the sit-down.
Is it?
Yeah,
you sure that when we turn around, you're not going to want us talking farther back or anything?
No.
Okay. All right.
All right. Let's go, Joe. A bug, my conscience, Jiminy Cricket. Oliver, you crossed the line. Oliver, you flipped. Oliver, you have to redo that because the watch wasn't on straight, or the eyeball isn't screwed in, or the actor didn't do the same match. Oliver. 193 times a day. At the end of the day, I want to reach over here, and I want to. Drives me crazy.
And we would like him to come to the witness table at this time and stop obstructing the progress of Congress. Welcome, Mr. Stone. We have your prepared statement. You are probably the reason that we're all here today. And you've moved the country and your Congress to immediate activity with reference to the subject matter that brings us here today. We welcome you before the Government Operations Committee. It's our honor and pleasure to have you as the next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a prepared statement, which you have for the record, which I may vary from slightly. I may improvise, as directors sometimes do, as I read. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, my name is Oliver Stone, and I assure you it is with pleasure and some pride that I appear before this subcommittee today to urge the passage of House Joint Resolution 454, quote, to provide for the expeditious disclosure of records relevant to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
I'm proud to be here, Mr. Chairman, because I think it is reasonable to suggest that my most recent work, the motion picture JFK, may, in its reception by the American people, have played some role in creating the state of public opinion from which House Joint Resolution 454 has emerged.
I have been accused by a number of people, some of them journalists, of a distortion of history. And if there is any common thread of attack running through claims of those critics of JFK, it is the notion that somehow there is an accepted, settled, respected, carefully thought out and researched body of history about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, all of which I have set out deliberately to subvert, using as my weapon the motion picture medium and taking as my target the impressionable young, who will believe anything as long as it is visual. This distortion of history, quote, charge has come at me from all quarters, although almost entirely, it must be said, from people old enough to know better. And it ignores deliberately and carefully the fact that there is no accepted history of these events, and that terrible times remain the most undocumented, unresearched, unagreed upon, non-historical period of our history. I have been ridiculed and worse for suggesting the existence of a conspiracy, as though only kooks and cranks and extremists suggest their existence. But this is the wrong city in which to ridicule people who believe in conspiracies.
Oliver Stone's controversial new film charges there was a conspiracy to kill President John F. Kennedy. And JFK is one of the movies we'll be reviewing this week on Siskel and Ebert. I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times.
And I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune. And my bottom line on JFK is that it is full of questionable material, but also full of undeniably compelling entertainment. As director Oliver Stone sees it, the Kennedy assassination was a coup d'etat of mammoth proportion involving everyone from the CIA to LBJ to munition manufacturers to the media. Leading the crusade for truth is Stone's idealized portrait of New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, played by Kevin Costner, in another one of his latter-day Jimmy Stewart roles. JFK is full of exceptional sequences of filmmaking. It made other films I saw the same day, and I saw one before and one after, but they seemed very small indeed. I think Oliver Stone has a right to interpret history any way he wants, history that is especially disputed. I think he might have served his film a little bit better by labeling his Jim Garrison character as Jim somebody else. That one change might have shown that he was aware of exactly what he was doing. And some of the speechifying at the end of the picture is too purple for my taste, but on balance, I admire this film, Oliver Stone's nerve, and I can't understand why anyone would want to miss it or miss the opportunity to debate it.
To debate it and to come out and to talk with a great deal of exuberance and controversy about what's in it. I found this film exhilarating.
Me too.
And you know, I've read a lot of attacks on it. They've been attacking it now for months. One of the News Weekly said, well, he'll confuse people because he shows you scenes that aren't real and makes you think they are. And they cited as an example the scene where a cop takes a palm print on the rifle off of the hand of Oswald's corpse. Now, how many people in the theater are going to think that a real cop would pose for the motion picture cameras while he's falsifying evidence? I don't think so. I think intelligent moviegoers are capable of looking at this movie and knowing exactly what Stone did. He took real footage, he took fictional footage, and a lot of it is speculative. In other words, Garrison's imagining different ways the same things could have happened, and it's exhilarating for us to follow that thought process through to the end, even if at the end we still don't know who killed Kennedy.
I think that what he is saying, really, I think that included in the conspiracy is the American public, in the sense of not demanding more. And here's a guy who feels, hey, look, I went to Vietnam. I have reason to believe that the whole Vietnam experience was caused or could have been averted if Kennedy had lived. Not sure, but could have been. Maybe a better chance than with LBJ running the ship. And therefore, I laid my life on it. I have the right to make a film about it, too. So on the right basis, I don't think that should be disputed at all. And it's very entertaining. And you know what's going to happen? I think that a lot of the great performances in this picture are going to get swallowed up in controversy, and they won't realize they're really performances, and they won't get nominated, and they should be.
They seem too real. But you know, a lot of the stuff that is real in this film is fascinating, too, and especially his use of the Zapruder film, the man who made the home movie of the assassination, and you look at this movie and you find it hard to believe that one of the bullets didn't come from the front.
At the same time, Roger, it's worth discussing because I have been reading a lot about this over the 20-some odd
there's
years.
a nervous twitch theory.
No, there's more than there's a nervous twitch. There's something about exiting propulsion and stuff.
Yeah.
But let's talk about it.
But you're right about one thing. Well, we're both right about one thing. It's a terrific movie. It really is a terrific movie-going experience.
What drew you to this project?
Oliver is tenacious, and I believe a lot in what he was talking about. I tell you what's beautiful about him is that he listens. For as many ideas as you hear Oliver come out with, he's a listener. He'll listen. I said, you have to do me a favor that when I say the things I say in this movie, that when we can't corroborate them anywhere, when we don't know that there's a real kind of meaning or value behind it, the truth behind it, you have got to let me say, let us suppose. And you know, he never blushed from that. I don't think Oliver is a person that stares into shadows and sees things. I think he's a true patriot. I think he's an artist. And I hope he doesn't burn himself up. And I hope he hears this.
From JFK, the documented screenplay, the book of the film, by Oliver Stone and Zachary Sklar, published by Applause Books. Interview with Oliver Stone by Roger Ebert, December 17th, 1991. Oliver Stone talks rapidly, and yet with a certain weariness, as if he knows the answers but fears he will not be listened to. He defends his new film, JFK, with a rush of dates and references and facts, and then when he is asked about the film's detractors, he reveals an underlying bitterness. Quote, "This has been a distressing experience. It was disturbing to have this film attacked so early. Never before in the history of movies has a film been attacked in the first draft screenplay form. All the established media seem to be terrified of my movie, as if it's somehow going to destroy their lives. I'm amazed at their fear. What stake do they have in it?" Unquote. This was a week before JFK opened on December 20th. Dan Rather had attacked the film on CBS, the Washington Post had printed and criticized some of the screenplay, political pundit Tom Wicker had written a negative cover story in the New York Times entertainment section, and Newsweek had splashed across its cover, "Why Oliver Stone's new movie can't be trusted." Their criticisms all boiled down to a couple of key points. They felt Stone's new movie was based on unsupportable speculation, and they believed the film's hero, former New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, was an unscrupulous publicity seeker who drummed up his celebrated case against Clay Shaw out of thin air. These points are no doubt well taken. I believe they are irrelevant to the film, which is not a documentary, not a historical study, and not a courtroom presentation, but a movie that weaves a myth around the Kennedy assassination, a myth in which the slain leader was the victim of a monstrous conspiracy. The pollsters tell us that most Americans believe this anyway. Even Tom Wicker, down deep in his piece, says he does not believe the Warren Commission's finding that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Well, who does? And yet the image of Oswald as the lone killer has been the official establishment myth for 28 years. Is it such a terrible thing Stone has done to weave a counter-myth? Here on the Movie Beat, I always sort of quail when anybody makes a film that ventures out of pure Hollywood fantasy and into the real lives of the experts in the front section of the newspaper. I am sure to be treated to many analytical studies of the factual accuracy of the film, in which the writers may be sound in their knowledge of history, but seem to have little idea why they or anyone else in the audience really goes to see a movie. People will not buy tickets to JFK because they think Oliver Stone knows who killed Kennedy. And when Babe comes out this summer and inspires all sorts of delusioned analysis on the sports page, that movie's factual accuracy will have nothing to do with the tickets it sells either. People go to the movies to be told a story. If it's a good story, they will believe in it for as long as the movie lasts. If it is a very good story, it may linger in their memory somewhat longer. In the case of JFK, which I think is a terrific example of storytelling. What they will remember is not the countless facts and conjectures that the movie's hero spins in his lonely campaign to solve the assassination. What they will remember is how we all felt on November 22nd, 1963, and why, for all of these years afterward, a lie has seemed to lodge in the national throat, the lie that we know the truth about who murdered Kennedy. There are many facts, factoids, fictions, and distortions in JFK, all used in the service of the story. To dissect the movie like a documentary is pointless. Tom Wicker in The Times, for example, complains that when Stone shows the assassination of Robert Kennedy, the movie makes it look as if Bobby were shot at the end of his California victory speech, rather than shortly after. Does Wicker think Stone was trying to deceive us on this point? Hasn't everyone seen the footage of Sirhan in the hotel kitchen? All through JFK, Stone uses techniques of the jump cut, the flash forward, the impatient edit to the next event. He is using it here. Literate filmgoers know that. Newsweek, in its warning against the pitfalls of the docudrama form, notes with concern, quote, "Only the alert viewer will be able to distinguish real documentary footage from reconstructed scenes," unquote. Which is true enough, but then the magazine cites with alarm such scenes as when, quote, "A police officer brings the murder rifle to Oswald's corpse and presses his palm print into the barrel," unquote. Give us a break. Is there anyone dumb enough to believe a cop would allow himself to be photographed while faking evidence? Oliver Stone is bitter about Wicker and Rather and his other detractors, but he doesn't use his best argument, that this is a movie. He counterattacks on a personal level, essentially saying that JFK is disliked by old guard journalists who have a personal stake in the lone assassin theory, because by their inaction they have allowed it to stand for all these years. Quote, "A lot of people who are attacking my credibility are older journalists who were there then and obviously endorsed the Warren Commission. Tom Wicker was there and says Garrison has no case and points to an NBC documentary that is so one-sided that when it aired, Garrison went to the FCC and successfully got rebuttal time on NBC. If it was shown now, it would be an embarrassment to NBC. And Dan Rather has made his career out of being at Dealey Plaza. He was one of the few journalists allowed to see the Zapruder film at the time, and he came out of it saying the force of the shot drove the president forward in his seat. That is an outright lie. Either that or he's blind. He certainly has a stake in the assassination because of his reporting of it. He bought the Oswald theory, and here I am, this punk from Hollywood who apparently knows nothing about history or politics. And who am I to come in with my artistic interpretation of these events?" Unquote. Here Stone does have the visible evidence on his side. Few people, Rather included, are going to be able to come out of JFK arguing that the final bullet drove Kennedy forward. In the movie, the Zapruder film of the assassination is played over and over, blown up to 35mm, as the Garrison character chants like a mantra, "Back and to the left, back and to the left." And yes, it does seem that the final bullet must have come from down in front of Kennedy, even though that fact all by itself destroys the theory that Oswald did all of the shooting from behind the motorcade. Has Rather seen your film? No. Are you going to show it to him? No. Let him go to the theater to pay for it. He's gotten enough free rides, and he's abused his power as far as I can see. He hasn't even seen the movie, but he says that my theories are half-baked. Stone is angry now. But then Stone is Hollywood's angriest director, a man who in the screenplay for Midnight Express, and in his own films Salvador, Platoon, Wall Street, Born on the 4th of July, and The Doors, and now more than ever in JFK, seems to be saying that he was lied to back in the 1960s and now wants to set the record straight. Quote, "I hate conventional thought. I always did. I think I went through a period of being institutionalized myself in boarding schools, Army, Merchant Marine, and college in the 1960s. I've seen conventional thinking, and I'm always rebelling against it. I see conventional thinking in most of the histories of the period. I think historians are finally starting to address the issue of what Kennedy was really doing from 61 to 63, unquote. What he was doing, according to JFK, was proposing to emasculate the military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned against in his farewell speech in 1960. Stated bluntly, Stone believes Kennedy was killed because his policies were bad for the arms business. Quote, "There was a civil war in this country. Kennedy provoked such hostility and hatred. His death was cheered in the South because of his support for Martin Luther King. He was moving to change things on all fronts. He was starting to end the Cold War. He made a deal with Khrushchev and Russia in 1962 to end the missile crisis, and he furthered the deal when he signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963. He installed the hotline. He made the American University speech where he described the Soviets for the first time in American history as mortals, like us, who care about their children. He seemed to have an expanding vision of the world. Quote, Kennedy himself said in 1962, after he read the novel 7 Days in May, which is about a military coup in the United States, that if he had had another Bay of Pigs, that could well happen to him. Well, he did have another Bay of Pigs. He had several. He had the missile crisis. They wanted him to invade Cuba. He didn't. They wanted him to send combat troops to Vietnam and Laos. He didn't. I think Kennedy prophesied his own death with those words. Unquote. Stone is famous for the pressure he puts himself under while making his films, which almost always involve daunting logistical problems like staging infantry combat or recreating rock concerts with thousands of fans. After JFK, he said he feels utterly drained. Quote, I think it was the most distressing film I've had to make. I knew I'd have eyes on the back of my head while I was directing this film. It was very difficult not to be rattled by the attacks saying this film was a monstrosity. Any piece of work like this is an act of love and trust and a leap of faith. You need to nurture something like this. To be attacked and stabbed in the back was not easy. Unquote. What he has achieved is, among other things, one of the most complicated films I have ever seen. By that I do not mean it is hard to follow. The main thrust is always there, and the audience always knows what it needs to know. But Stone's screenplay uses countless sound and image bites. It jumps around freely in time. It shows the same events in different ways from different points of view. And even in Garrison's long summation to the jury, the movie jumps back and forth from testimony to flashbacks, to conjecture, to possibility. At the end, Stone deliberately makes it impossible for us to know exactly what he thinks happened on November 22, 1963. The movie is more urgently about what he believes did not happen. Do you, I asked him, have a personal theory about the assassination? Do you think you know the names of the guilty? Quote, I do. My own conclusions go harder and further than the film. I think I pulled back to some degree because I didn't have the proof necessary to name names, and I can only make a hypothesis. And that's a very heavy thing to lay on somebody, to accuse them of killing the president. After the film is out there and the public has had a chance to see it and react to it, I think the discussion could be furthered. Unquote. One way that could happen, he says, is if the locked CIA, FBI, and Senate files on the assassination were to be made public. Quote, I think we should follow the example of today's Russia, Romania, and East Germany. I think we should invade the CIA and FBI and get these files out. Get the military intelligence files out on Lee Harvey Oswald. Get the military intelligence files on Jack Kennedy that day in Dallas. Why the security precautions were what they were. There's so much that they never gave to the Warren Commission. We should get the House Select Committee to release their files that are embargoed until 2029. They could just take a vote now and release all those files. It only takes one congressman. Unquote. From his tone of voice, Stone made it obvious that he did not think the Congress contained such a man. Quote, people in power are afraid to ask obvious questions. From day one, they accepted the cover story that Oswald did it alone. Oswald said he was the patsy. A lot of people believed him, but not the establishment. Since that day, the media has chanted the mantra that Oswald did it alone. But the American public, which has been brainwashed with that for 28 years, has never accepted it. They smell a rat. Unquote. Clarifying the Conspiracy, an interview with Oliver Stone by Gary Crowdis, 1992, cineast, editor. In late January 1992, at the end of a long day of interviews in New York, Oliver Stone spoke with cineast editor Gary Crowdis in a limousine as it careened through Manhattan traffic, rushing Stone to the airport where he was catching a flight to Germany, the first stop in a press tour for the European openings of JFK. Question. The mainstream press attacks on the film have been outrageous and unprecedented. Have there been any establishment critics who surprised you with their perceptive reviews or support? Stone. I thought David Anson in Newsweek was very bold, as was David Denby in New York. Norman Mailer wrote a fascinating in-depth piece in Vanity Fair, which shows that he accepts the possibility of what could have happened. He called the movie an overarching paradigm, which is an interesting concept for it because it is a hypothesis. I've never said it was the truth. I said it's a combination of facts plus speculation. There were many critics who surprised me, like Joanna Connors of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I never heard of her, but her first-day review of the film was a significant analysis, saying that Stone has, quote, reopened the forum and upped the ante on both American politics and American movies, unquote. I think there are a lot of intelligent critics out there. We've got some very good reviews. New York, except for Demby's review, was the most negative city of all, and it makes me wonder. The New York Times was uniformly critical with something like 15 to 20 pieces. I've been struggling to get my letters and op-ed pieces in print, and they've been published here and there only after great pressure from us, including the threat to take an ad. I'm going through the same bullshit with the Times that I went through with the Washington Post. At first they wouldn't publish my rejoinder to Lardner, and I had to threaten to sue them. Legal letters were sent, essentially that it was copyright infringement suit, and after the lawyers negotiated, they agreed to print my response. But then they surprised us by also printing Lardner's response, a 2-for-1 type of deal. The same thing happened with the Times. They'd reprint my response only after we threatened to take an ad. I had to respond to Leslie Gelb, and as of this date, I'm still trying to respond to Anthony Lewis, who made outrageous allegations against Garrison. Lewis is supposed to be a liberal, but to me he represents the failure of the old-line liberal establishment to fully investigate the JFK assassination. Question. The press has criticized you for attempting a hard sell of your own specific interpretation of the assassination conspiracy. But isn't the author's message of the film, as you have X say in so many words, don't take my word for it, think for yourself? Stone. I'm presenting what I call the counter-myth to the myth of the Warren Commission report, because honestly I don't have all the facts. The best smoking gun we have is a Zapruder film, which is a time clock of the assassination. Beyond that, there are all these files that could be opened to bring out more truth. The best I can do is present a hypothesis, which will hopefully encourage people to move away from the Warren Commission report and maybe read some books, or at least question the concept of our government's covert operations. What did the New York Times CNN poll show? That 50% of the American people believe the CIA did it, and 18% believe the military did it. That means 68% of the American people believe their own government killed JFK. That's far more than those who believe the mafia theory. Question. Was the editing style of the film preconceived or simply necessitated because you were interweaving so many simultaneous events? Stone. Well, it's a bit of both. It was preconceived. There were a lot of flashbacks in the first draft. I wanted to do the film on 2 or 3 levels. Sound and picture would take us back, and we'd go from one flashback to another, and then that flashback would go inside another flashback. Like the Lee Bowers thing. We go to Lee Bowers at the Warren Commission, and then Lee Bowers at the railroad yard, all seen from Jim's point of view in his study. I wanted multiple layers because reading the Warren Commission report is like drowning. The levels and consciousness of reality created through sound, the work done by Wiley Stateman and Michael Minkler is incredible, was also in the script. But Warner Brothers was confused by the script. You can imagine 158 pages filled with flashbacks like that, and I think there are some 2,800 shots in the movie. So I took out all the flashbacks and gave them a simpler script which they liked. Then I and the editors, Joe Huching, Pietro Scalia, and Hank Corwin, ended up putting all the flashbacks back in the editing room and adding quite a few new ones in a sort of prismatic structure. A Destabilized America. Michel Simont and Hubert Neo-Gray. 1992. Question. What did the JFK screenplay look like? The screenplay was 190 pages of details without footnotes, and some of it was improvised. In my opinion, there were 4 films: Garrison in New Orleans, The Reconstruction of Dealey Plaza, The Oswald Story, and The Story of Washington, D.C. and Colonel X. 4 intertwined strands. Question. The link to Capra is not only through these small-town people seeking the truth, but also through identification with the main character, who is seductive, like Gary Cooper or James Stewart, and through the final speech, a thesis that you follow throughout the film. Stone. You're right. I find the Capra films quite harsh. darker than the rather sentimental image that Americans have of them. If you watch them, you see that the heroes experience very painful and difficult situations. In fact, they often lose in the end. Capra was very aware of fascism, which he considered a political menace to the country and to democracy. I begin my film with Eisenhower's speech, which was really a shock. He was the president, a conservative, and a soldier. He kept the country from drifting into fascism, which happens in the film. It's fundamentally the most subversive film I've ever made, the most destabilizing for America. Primarily, he says that we're destabilizing our government. What is a democracy? By hiding the truth, by not controlling our own government, we've created a phantom government, a parallel government, that imposes an American plan of action. The film provoked a furor. Question: how do you explain such a violent reaction? Stone: the critic for the Washingtonian, the In magazine in Washington, has just been fired because he gave the film a good review. The editor refused to publish it. The basic reason comes down to one question. Does the government belong to the people, or is it fascist? That's what the film's about. It's the state against the individual. But it deals with the press's attitude towards the 1963 affair. I said it often on American television. The press exploded when it fell for the phony story of the cover-up, like in a psychological or clandestine operation. This story of Oswald as the lone gunman was put out that Friday afternoon. Oswald was arrested at 2 p.m. and by 5 p.m. all the American news agencies had his biography as a loner, a crackpot, a communist, all of it, with pictures, and was sent out all over the world. Mr. X was in New Zealand, but it was surely the same thing in France, in Egypt, everywhere. After that Sunday morning when Oswald was shot, the New York Times headline read, "President's assassin shot to death in Dallas." Not alleged assassin. It was like a John Wayne movie. The bad guy shot the good guy through a window. Then he was killed by a vigilante, an honest guy who's anything but crazy. But he's a good guy too. He's an American patriot who wanted to spare Jackie Kennedy from having to testify in a Dallas trial. That works. The shifts in tempo in the film are very interesting. First the news, then the interview with David Ferry, and finally the interview with Colonel X. Those are 3 stages in the plot line. Stone: it's fascinating for me because the film lasts 3 hours, and each hour takes you to the next level. The first hour is a microcosm of New Orleans and its people. We start with Dealey Plaza, which we use as a point of reference since we keep coming back to it. We go to New Orleans, we come back to Dealey Plaza. The second hour introduces the Colonel X character. We reach the next, higher, macrocosmic level. The third hour is essentially the trial, with Oswald's story intertwined. The tempo seems to work well, and the film gets more and more interesting. A 3-hour film is very difficult to make, because you're not aware of the length. The choice of Kevin Costner is also very American. You used his past experience as an actor who had just played in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and he has a kind of Gary Cooper image as well. Stone: I seem to have borrowed his image. He's extraordinary in the movie. He underplays the role, and it's a 3-hour film. He's underrated because he speaks in something of a monotone, but that's his style. Gary Cooper did the same thing, and so did Henry Fonda. People always underestimate an actor who doesn't perform like Daniel Day-Lewis. He must not be a great actor. It's another kind of acting. In a 3-hour film, you need to latch on to someone you can watch without getting bored. If he gets into the part, you'll like him. If he performs with actors like Joe Pesci, he lets them upstage him. But in the end, he's the one who dominates the film. It's a minimalist interpretation that works. No one gets bored, and he's one of the reasons. JFK by Roger Ebert, April 29th, 2001. I don't have the slightest idea whether Oliver Stone knows who killed President John F. Kennedy. I have no opinion on the factual accuracy of his 1991 film JFK. I don't think that's the point. This is not a film about the facts of the assassination, but about the feelings. JFK accurately reflects our national state of mind since November 22nd, 1963. We feel the whole truth has not been told, that more than one shooter was involved, that somehow maybe the CIA, the FBI, Castro, the anti-Castro Cubans, the Mafia, or the Russians, or all of the above were involved. We don't know. That's just how we feel. Shortly after the film was released, I ran into Walter Cronkite and received a tongue lashing aimed at myself and my colleagues who had praised JFK. There was not, he said, a shred of truth in it. It was a mishmash of fabrications and paranoid fantasies. It did not reflect the most elementary principles of good journalism. We should all be ashamed of ourselves. I have no doubt Cronkite was correct from his point of view, but I am a film critic, and my assignment is different than his. He wants facts. I want moods, tones, fears, imaginings, whims, speculations, nightmares. As a general principle, I believe films are the wrong medium for fact. Fact belongs in print. Films are about emotions. My notion is that JFK is no more or less factual than Stone's Nixon, or Gandhi, Lawrence of Arabia, Gladiator, Amistad, Out of Africa, My Dog Skip, or any other movie based on quote-unquote real life. All we can reasonably ask is that it be skillfully made and seem to approach some kind of emotional truth. Given that standard, JFK is a masterpiece. It's like a collage of all the books and articles, documentaries and TV shows, scholarly debates, and conspiracy theories since 1963. We know the litany by heart. The grassy knoll, the hobos in dress shoes, the parade route, the Bay of Pigs, Lee Harvey Oswald in Russia, the two Oswalds, Clay Shaw, Allen Dulles, 3 shots in 2.6 seconds, the eyewitness testimony, the woman with the umbrella, the gunpowder tests, the palm print, Jack Ruby, the military-industrial complex, the wrong shadows on the photograph, the Zapruder film, and on and on. These items are like pegs on a child's workbench. We pound one down and another one springs up. Oliver Stone was born to make this movie. He is a filmmaker of feverish energy and limitless technical skills, able to assemble a bewildering array of facts and fancies and compose them into a film without getting bogged down. His secret is that he doesn't intend us to remember all his pieces and fit them together and arrive at logical conclusions. His film is not about the case assembled by his hero, New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. It is about Garrison's obsession. The film's thrust is not towards truth, but toward frustration and anger. Too many lies have been told and too much evidence tainted for the truth to ever be known. All Garrison can reasonably hope to prove is that the official version is unlikely or impossible, and that tantalizing clues and connections suggest a hidden level on which the dots connect differently. Stone was much criticized for choosing Garrison as his hero. Who should he have chosen? Earl Warren? Al Dulles? Walter Cronkite? As a filmmaker, it is his assignment to find a protagonist who reflects his feelings. Jim Garrison may not have been on the right track, but he was a perfect surrogate for our national doubts. He asked questions that have never been satisfactorily answered, that can have no answers, and indeed cannot even be questions, if the Warren Report orthodoxy is correct. Jim Garrison was the obvious hero for any film about a conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy. Stone found the right visual style too. We've been bombarded by incoming information. It's come for decades in films, in print, on TV news, in documentaries, in photographs analyzed down to their constituent molecules. None of this stuff fits together. A film with a smooth and consistent visual style would have felt false. Stone and his expert cinematographer Robert Richardson, who won the Oscar, work in every relevant visual medium: 35mm, 16mm, Super 8, 8mm, video, still photos, color, black and white. His editors Joe Huching and Pietro Scalia, also Oscar winners, assemble this material like the pieces of a jigsaw. It's not linear. There's a sense of parallel events flowing forward on more than just one front at a time. Consider the scene with Garrison and his investigators in a restaurant, which is intercut with shots of the alleged fabrication of the photo of Oswald and his rifle. As the group breaks up in frustration, the trajectory of the other sequence lands the photo on the cover of Life magazine. Was the photo fabricated? Who knows? The shadows sure don't seem to match. Of course, it was also the Time-Life empire that supplied conspiracy theorists with their most valuable weapon, the Zapruder film. Conspirators, whoever they may have been, didn't figure on Zapruder. the film says. Without his grainy home movie, we would have no way of knowing that the shots were so closely spaced it seems unlikely Oswald could have fired them all. JFK argues, and most of us still agree, that Oswald's high-speed accuracy is hard to believe. It reflects our gut feelings. It speaks for our dark suspicions. Stone uses a huge cast to help us follow all these characters through the thicket of evidence, reconstructions, flashbacks, hypothetical meetings, and fleeting glimpses. He makes use of typecasting and the star system. Actors such as Gary Oldman are chosen not just because they are skilled, but because they look like the characters they play. Stars like Jack Lemmon, Ed Asner, Walter Matthau, Kevin Bacon, Donald Sutherland, and Sissy Spacek are used to create instant emotional zones around their characters. Less recognizable stars such as Michael Rooker are cast in satellite roles. He plays a key Garrison investigator. We recognize him every time he turns up on screen, but he doesn't upstage the boss. And Kevin Costner in the central role brings all of his believability and likability and dogged determination to the character of Garrison. He's not a hotshot or a genius, but a stubborn man who gets mad when he's lied to. There's a lot of exposition in the film. There are times when Stone essentially asks us to listen while a character explains things. These scenes could have been deadly. He makes them exciting by using persuasive actors, by cutting between many different points of view, and by reconstructing the events being described. The key narrator is Mr. X, the high-level Pentagon official played by Sutherland. Was there really a Mr. X? I doubt it. Does what he tells Garrison reflect the thinking inside the military establishment of the early 1960s? It sounds likely, more likely, certainly, than the pious platitudes of the official version. The assassination of John F. Kennedy will obsess history as it has obsessed those whose lives were directly touched. The facts, such as they are, will continue to be elusive and debatable. Any factual film would be quickly dated, but JFK will stand indefinitely as a record of how we felt, how the American people suspect there was more to it than was ever revealed, how we suspect Oswald did not act entirely alone, that there was some kind of conspiracy. JFK is a brilliant reflection of our unease and paranoia, our restless dissatisfaction. On that level, it is completely factual.
And what a cast. We were very lucky. Very rarely in our director's lifetime can you put together so many good people. It takes a certain, I think, a spirit that the material would project, that people feel. They feel part of something great. That's the best you can do, get in touch with greatness. But I really thank all these people for doing it. Every person in this film should be proud of having been in it. It was a huge casting job and a huge shooting involving, but it only came in ultimately 72 days, believe it or not. It was highly organized and we really moved fast through Dallas, New Orleans, and back to Washington. But 72 days seems amazing when you see these 100-day pictures that are just about nothing. I don't care what they say. This is my Godfather. This is my Godfather. I can't get any bigger than this, and pull that off, all those stories. So, as far as I'm concerned, Nixon's Godfather 2 for me, and this is Godfather 1, so, I feel good about it. Even if nobody agrees, it doesn't matter. It's what I think that matters. And I think it's just a tremendous blend of contradictory styles, which is enormous power to it, because it's like what Fitzgerald said about the sign of a true intellect or a true movie to me would be the ability to hold in its hand two or more or three, four contradictory impulses, you see. There are contradictions all throughout this film. I mean, it's not a one-way. If this was a propagandistic film, as so many critics claim, it would be boring. The fact is that the tension results from you not knowing what is going to happen next. There's forces pulling against each other. You sense the forces. You don't know exactly what they are, frankly, nor do I. This Kennedy murder has become our national taboo. I pray yet for my country to return even to a fraction of the ideals in which it was birthed. I love it as much as any man. I served in its armed forces with some distinction. But that's not to say I'm a nationalist or a blind patriot, because all too often, the last refuge of the scoundrel, the man who is not served and calls on his country to advance his ideology, is the scoundrel. Unfortunately, the worst part in America came out in its reaction to Kennedy's murder and its desire to simplify it, to deal with good guys and bad guys and a lone gunman, John Wayne theatrics. I believe there was a deeper and significant erosion of trust in our government. On a conscious level, we moved on. We buried Oswald, we got rid of Ruby, the nightmare went away. But subconsciously, Fletcher Prouty used the word tsunami wave. The tsunami wave silently occurred and continues to roll on towards the shore. And at the beginning of this new millennium, we must ask ourselves, with integrity, have we all become part of a commercial corporate state with ourselves as media-dominated consumer slaves, or are we still a true democracy wherein private conscience and individual action still matter? I said at the time that the Warren Commission from beginning to end was a myth. I still believe so, and I believe that JFK, the movie, was made as counter-myth, which I believe truly represents the inner spiritual meaning of this assassination. Only in the 21st century, I think, will historians catch up to what we have tried to obscure, and they will point their fingers at us as a society of consent, fear, and mediocrity in this matter. But more tragically, they will point to John Kennedy's death as a key moment and not a ridiculous footnote in American history. A quote from one of our American poets from Michigan, Theodore Roethke: "In a dark time, the eye begins to see."